The police officer on the other end of the line didn't ask if I had a daughter. He told me, "Your missing daughter has been found, Mr. Bennett. She is currently in custody at the precinct, and we need you to come down immediately to confirm her identity." I gripped my phone tighter, standing on the edge of my roof with a hammer in my hand. "Officer," I said, my voice steady despite the confusion, "you have the wrong number. I only have one son. I do not have a daughter." The line went silent for a second, heavy with the kind of authority that doesn't like to be questioned. "Mr. Bennett, the girl has your phone number tattooed on her shoulder. If you do not come down here voluntarily to explain why a beaten young woman has your contact information permanently inked into her skin, I will send a patrol car to pick you up. And I promise you, we won't be gentle." The threat hung in the humid air. I looked down at my quiet suburban street, at the house I had paid for with 40 years of sweat and secrets. I hung up the phone, climbed down the ladder, and drove to the station. When I walked into that interrogation room, the woman I saw left me stunningly cold. She wasn't just a stranger. She was the beginning of the end of my life as I knew it. "My name is Samuel Bennett. I am 68 years old, and for the last decade, I have played the role of a simple man. To my neighbors, I am just a retired carpenter who spends too much time fixing his roof and tending to his garden. To my son Tyrell and his wife Skylar, I am a stubborn old relic, a man with a small pension and a house that is too big for him. They think I am slow. They think I am past my prime. They see my calloused hands and my old truck, and they see poverty. They have no idea that the hydraulic valve patent I filed 30 years ago is currently filtering the water for half the state of California. They don't know about the trust funds, the offshore accounts, or the fact that I make more in a month doing nothing than they make in 5 years of scheming. I kept it secret to protect them, to teach them the value of hard work. But as I drove to the police station that Tuesday afternoon, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, I realized that my silence hadn't protected anyone. It had only made me a target. I had been up on the roof when the call came. At 68, most men are sitting in recliners, but I like the work. I like the heat of the sun and the smell of tar. It keeps the mind sharp. When my phone rang, I thought it was Tyrell asking for money again. It is always something with him, a lost bet, a car repair, a sure thing investment that went south. But the voice wasn't Tyrell. It was deep, rough, and dripping with suspicion. "This is Officer Miller," the voice said. "We have a Jane Doe here. She claims to be your daughter. She has been badly beaten, Mr. Bennett." I tried to tell him it was a mistake. I told him my life is an open book. I have one son, Tyrell Bennett, 30 years old, no other children, no secrets in the closet. But Officer Miller wasn't listening. The detail about the tattoo froze the blood in my veins. A tattoo of my phone number. Who does that? Why would a stranger brand themselves with my contact information? The threat of arrest was not idle. As a black man in this country, even a wealthy one, I know better than to test the patience of the police, especially when a battered woman is involved. I wiped the grease from my hands onto my work pants, grabbed my keys, and got into my 2005 Ford pickup. I could have taken the Mercedes I keep in a storage unit 3 towns over, but Samuel the carpenter drives a Ford. The drive to the precinct took 20 minutes. My mind was racing, running simulations like the engineering software I used to design. Was this a scam? Was it Tyrell? My son has a gambling problem that he thinks he hides well. He owes money to people who don't send letters. They send broken bones. Maybe this was their way of getting my attention. Or maybe it was Skylar. My daughter-in-law has eyes that calculate the price of everything she looks at. She looks at me and sees a walking inheritance check. But a missing daughter. That was a twist I didn't see coming. The police station smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and misery. I walked up to the front desk, keeping my posture humble. "I am here to see Officer Miller," I said. He called me. A man stepped out from the back. He was big, with a buzz cut and a look of pure disdain on his face. He looked me up and down, taking in my work boots and my dust-covered t-shirt. "Mr. Bennett," he said, not offering his hand. "You took your time." "I came as fast as I could," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "I want to clear this up. I don't know who this girl is." Miller laughed, a short, barking sound. "Yeah, they all say that. Innocent until proven broke, right? Follow me." He led me through the bullpen. I felt eyes on me, accusing eyes. I walked with my head high, ignoring the whispers. He stopped in front of an interrogation room with a one-way mirror. "Take a look," he said, gesturing to the glass. "Tell me you've never seen her before." I stepped forward and looked through the glass. The girl sitting at the metal table was young, maybe 25 or 26. She was small, fragile-looking, but it was her condition that made me flinch. Her face was a map of violence. One eye was swollen shut, purple and angry. Her lip was split. There were bruises blooming on her arms like dark flowers. She was shivering, wrapping a thin gray blanket around her shoulders. And she was white. I turned to Miller, confusion warring with anger. "Officer, look at me, then look at her. I am a black man. That girl is white as a sheet. How in God's name could she be my daughter?" Miller crossed his arms, unimpressed. "Genetics are funny things, Mr. Bennett. Maybe she's adopted. Maybe she's a stepdaughter you forgot to mention. Or maybe you're just a liar. She has your number on her shoulder. She asked for you by name. She's terrified, and she won't talk to anyone but you. So you are going to go in there, and you are going to get her to talk." I looked back at the girl. She was rocking back and forth slightly. This was a trap. I could feel it in my gut. A sophisticated, dangerous trap. But I couldn't see the mechanism yet. If I walked away, Miller would book me for something. Obstruction, negligence, maybe even kidnapping if they spun it right. I had to play the game until I learned the rules. "Fine," I said. "Let me talk to her." Miller unlocked the door and shoved it open. He leaned against the frame, watching. I stepped inside. The air in the room was cold. The girl looked up. Her good eye, a piercing blue, locked onto mine. For a second, I saw fear. Genuine, animal terror. But then, something shifted. Her expression changed faster than a cloud passing over the sun. "Daddy!" she cried out. Her voice was cracked and dry. She scrambled up from the chair, the blanket falling to the floor. She threw herself at me, wrapping her arms around my waist, burying her face in my dirty work shirt. "Oh God, Daddy, you came. You finally came." I stood there, rigid as a board. My hands hovered in the air, refusing to touch her. This stranger was hugging me like I was her lifeline. I could feel Officer Miller's eyes drilling into my back. This was it, the evidence he needed. She recognized me. I tried to pry her off. "Miss," I said firmly, pushing her shoulders back, "I am not your father. You are confused. Please, let go." She didn't let go. Instead, she gripped me tighter, her fingers digging into my back with a strength that surprised me. She pulled herself up, standing on her tiptoes, bringing her lips right to my ear. I expected her to beg, to cry, to ramble. I expected the voice of a victim, but the voice that whispered in my ear was cold, steady, and sharp as a razor blade. It was not the voice of a confused girl. It was the voice of a soldier behind enemy lines. "Tyrell and Schuyler paid me $10,000 to pretend to be your illegitimate daughter," she whispered, her words rapid fire, too low for Miller to hear. "They forged the DNA papers. They set this whole thing up to split your assets so they could challenge your will." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. Tyrell, my son, Schuyler, the woman who smiles at me across the dinner table while wishing I was dead. The girl continued, her desperation real now, but for a different reason. "But they changed the plan, old man. They aren't just trying to scam you anymore. They realize that if I show up, I become a liability. Tyrell tried to run my car off the road last night. That's where these bruises came from. They didn't pay me. They tried to kill me to tie up the loose ends before I even got to you." She pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes with a pleading intensity, tears streaming down her face for the benefit of the officer watching us. But her whisper continued, lethal and precise. "If you deny me right now, that cop throws me back on the street, and your son finishes the job tonight. And once I'm dead, they will frame you for it, because my body has your number on it. We are both in the crosshairs, Samuel. You have to claim me. You have to take me home. It is the only way either of us survives the night." She buried her face in my chest again and let out a loud, racking sob. "Daddy, please take me home. I'm so sorry I ran away. Please don't be mad." My mind was spinning. It was a lot to process in 10 seconds. Tyrell and Schuyler had hired a con artist, a fake daughter. It was a classic long con. Introduce a new heir, create chaos, force a settlement, or maybe prove I was mentally incompetent for having a secret life. But greed is a messy business. They got greedy. They decided they didn't want to pay the actress. They decided a dead, fake daughter was cheaper than a living one. And now, this girl, this stranger, was the only thing standing between me and a murder charge. I looked at Officer Miller. He was smirking, hand resting on his belt. He thought he had me. He thought he was looking at a deadbeat dad caught in a lie. He didn't know he was looking at a man who was about to go to war with his own family. I looked down at the girl, Harper. That's what Miller had called her. I didn't know her real name. I didn't know if she was telling the truth or if this was just another layer of the scam. But I knew Tyrell. I knew his desperation. And I knew Skylar's cold ambition. It fit. God help me. It fit perfectly. I had a split-second choice. Deny her, let the system swallow her, and wait for the police to knock on my door with a warrant for a murder I didn't commit. Or play the game, embrace the lie, bring the enemy into my house and find out exactly how deep the rot went. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her fear and the cheap hospital antiseptic they had used to clean her wounds. I slowly lowered my hands and wrapped them around her. I patted her hair, awkward and stiff. "It's okay, baby girl," I said, my voice loud enough for Miller to hear, forcing a tremble into it. "Daddy's here. I've got you." Miller's smirk vanished. He looked disappointed. He stepped into the room. "So you admit it, Mr. Bennett. This is your daughter." I looked at him, channeling every ounce of the tired, beaten-down old man they all thought I was. "Yes, officer. This is my Harper. She's been gone a long time. I honestly didn't recognize her at first. The drugs, the life, it changes a person." Harper sobbed louder, hiding her face to cover the lack of tears. "I'm sorry, Daddy. You're free to go," Miller said, clearly annoyed that he didn't get to use his handcuffs today. "But don't think this is over. I'm filing a report to social services. If she's been abused, we will find out who did it." I guided Harper out of the room, my arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight. She leaned on me, heavy and hurting. We walked through the station, past the staring eyes of the other officers, out into the blinding afternoon sun. When we got to my truck, I opened the passenger door for her. She climbed in, wincing as her bruised ribs shifted. I walked around to the driver's side, got in, and locked the doors. The silence in the cab was thick. I started the engine, the old Ford rumbling to life. I didn't look at her. I stared straight ahead through the windshield. "You are a grifter," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You tried to scam me. You worked with my son to destroy my life." Harper leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. The terrified daughter act dropped instantly. Her voice was flat, exhausted. "Yeah, I did. But right now I'm the only ally you've got. Your son isn't just a gambler, Samuel. He's desperate. And your daughter-in-law? She's the one who told him to run me off the road. She's the one calling the shots." I put the truck in gear. "We are going to my house," I said. "You are going to play the role of your life. If you slip up, if you try to run, or if I smell even a hint of a double cross, I will drive you back to this station myself and hand you over to Miller. Do you understand?" Harper opened one eye. It was swollen, but the gaze was sharp. "I understand. But you better be a good actor too, Dad. Because when we walk through that front door, Tyrell is going to look like he's seen a ghost. And Skylar? She's going to try to finish what she started." I pulled out of the parking lot, merging into traffic. I wasn't just driving home. I was driving into a battlefield. My son wanted a war. He was about to get one. I pressed the gas pedal, and we headed toward the house where my enemies were waiting for dinner. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to love you. Because what happened when I opened that front door, nobody could have predicted. The drive from the police station to my house was a blur of silence and tension. The old Ford truck rattled over the suburban asphalt, a sound that usually calmed me, but today sounded like the ticking of a bomb. Beside me, the girl who called herself Harper sat with her knees pulled up to her chest. She was trembling, but her eyes were dry and alert, scanning the passing houses like a soldier entering enemy territory. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We both knew the script. We were about to walk onto a stage where the other actors wanted us dead. I pulled into the driveway of the two-story colonial that I had bought 30 years ago. It stood there, pristine and white, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon. It looked like the American dream. Inside, it was a nest of vipers. Through the large bay window, I could see the silhouette of my son Tyrell and his wife Skylar. They were moving around the dining room. I saw Tyrell raise a wine glass. They were celebrating. They were toasting to the success of their plan, thinking the loose end had been tied up and left in a ditch. I turned off the ignition. The silence in the cab was heavy. Harper looked at me. Her bruised face was a mask of determination. I nodded once. It was time. I got out and walked around to help her down. She leaned heavily on me, gripping my arm with a force that told me she was terrified, but ready. We walked up the path to the front door. I fished my keys from my pocket, my hands steady despite the rage boiling in my gut. I didn't knock. It was my house. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell of roasted garlic and expensive red wine hit me instantly. Soft jazz was playing from the speakers. Tyrell and Skylar were seated at the dining table, a spread of food between them that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. There were architectural blueprints spread out on the side of the table. They were already planning the renovations for the sale. They were so absorbed in their victory that they didn't look up immediately. "Honey, I thought we heard the truck," Skylar said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. She turned in her chair, a smile plastered on her face. "Did you finally get rid of that old junk and buy a real car?" Her smile froze. It didn't fade slowly. It vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. Tyrell turned to follow her gaze. He was holding a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, lifting it to his lips. When he saw us standing in the archway, his brain simply stopped working. He stared at Harper. He stared at the girl who was supposed to be a corpse or a missing person case. He looked at her bruised face, the bandages, the dirt on her clothes. The glass slipped from his fingers. It didn't fall in slow motion like in the movies. It hit the edge of the table and shattered instantly, spraying red wine all over Skylar's cream-colored dress and the white Persian rug she had insisted we buy last month. The sound of breaking glass cut through the jazz music like a gunshot. Tyrell stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish, gasping for air on a dock. His eyes darted from Harper to me and back again, wide with panic. Skylar was the first to recover, though her face had drained of all color. She stood up slowly, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. She ignored the wine soaking into her dress. Her eyes were fixed on Harper, calculating, assessing, trying to figure out how this ghost was standing in her dining room. "Dad," Tyrell finally stammered, his voice an octave higher than usual. "What is this? Who is this? Why is she here?" I walked into the room, guiding Harper to the head of the table. I looked at my son, channeling the confusion of a senile old man while keeping my eyes hard. "This is your sister, Tyrell. The police found her. They called me. She was hurt. She needs us." Tyrell looked like he was about to vomit. "My sister," he choked out. "Dad, I don't have a sister. You don't have a daughter. This is crazy. This is some kind of mistake." "It is not a mistake," Harper spoke up. Her voice was weak, trembling, perfect for the role. She looked at Tyrell with wide, confused eyes. "Why are you yelling? My head hurts. Daddy said this was my home. Why is he yelling at me?" She slumped against me, letting out a whimper of pain. I helped her toward the living room sofa, the expensive beige one that Skylar didn't allow anyone to sit on with shoes. Harper collapsed onto it, dirty boots and all, curling into a ball. Skylar moved then, stepping around the broken glass. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the tremor of fear beneath it. "Samuel," she said, using my first name, which she only did when she was losing patience. "Think clearly. You have never had a daughter. This girl is a stranger. She is obviously injured and confused. We need to call the hospital. We need to call the police back. She cannot stay here." I turned to face her. "I am not calling the police," I said firmly. "She is terrified of them. Look at her, Skylar. Look at her face. Someone beat her. She only feels safe with me. The officer said she knew my name. She had my number. I am not turning my back on family." "Family." Skylar spat the word out before she could stop herself. She took a deep breath, forcing her face back into a mask of concern. "I just mean, we are not equipped to handle this. Look at her. She might have a brain injury. She doesn't know what she is saying." Harper sat up slightly, clutching a throw pillow. "I'm hungry," she said, her voice taking on a childlike, demanding tone. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. I want food." "Daddy, tell them to bring me food." Tyrell looked at Skylar, waiting for instructions. He was paralyzed. Skylar looked at the wine stain on the rug, then at the dirty girl on her sofa, then at me. She realized she was losing control of the narrative. She realized that if she pushed too hard, I might get suspicious. She had to play along. She had to pretend to be the caring daughter-in-law, at least until she could figure out a new way to dispose of the problem. "Of course," Skylar said, her smile returning, tight and brittle as glass. "We will get you something to eat. Tyrell, clean up this glass. I will go to the kitchen and warm up some soup. Samuel, why don't you get her some water?" I nodded, playing the obedient father. I went to the kitchen, my movements slow and deliberate. I could feel Skylar's eyes boring into my back until I turned the corner. The kitchen was modern and sterile, renovated last year with my money, though they claimed Tyrell had won a bonus. I walked to the sink and filled a glass of water. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I needed to know what they were saying. I needed to know their next move. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened an app that looked like a simple calculator. It wasn't. It was the control hub for the mesh network of high-fidelity microphones and cameras I had installed in the crown molding of every room in the house 3 months ago. I had installed them after I noticed cash missing from my wallet and my bank statements disappearing from the mail. I thought I was catching a thief. I didn't know I was catching predators. I tapped the icon for the dining room. I put one earbud in, covering it with my gray hair, and leaned against the counter, pretending to wait for the water to run cold. The audio feed was crystal clear. "You said you cut the brakes," Skylar's voice hissed through the earbud. It was a whisper, but the microphone picked up every venomous syllable. "You told me you cut the line on her car and watched her drive off. You said she would be dead in a ditch by morning." I gripped the edge of the granite countertop. My knees almost buckled. Cutting the brakes. This wasn't just a threat or a beating. They had actively tried to murder her. "I did," Tyrell whispered back, his voice frantic. "I swear to God, Sky. I cut the line. I watched the fluid leak out. She must have crashed and walked away. Or maybe she didn't drive it. I don't know. But she is here now. What are we going to do? If she remembers, we are going to prison for attempted murder." "She doesn't remember," Skylar snapped. "Did you see her eyes? She is concussed. She thinks your dad is her savior. She is playing out some daddy-issue fantasy because her brain is scrambled. We have a window, Tyrell. A small window." "What window?" Tyrell asked. "We can't kill her here, not with Dad watching." "We don't have to kill her," Skylar said, her voice dropping lower, becoming colder. "We just have to make her go away. Legally. Look at her. She is erratic. She is delusional. She claims to be a family member who doesn't exist. That is grounds for an involuntary psychiatric hold." "You want to commit her?" Tyrell asked. "Tonight," Skylar confirmed. "I am going to call Dr. Evans. He owes us a favor after we didn't report his malpractice with your aunt. We will tell him Samuel brought home a dangerous stray who is threatening us. We will tell him she is violent. We get her sedated. We get her into a facility. And once she is locked up and medicated, nobody will listen to a word she says about brakes or brothers. She becomes just another crazy girl in the system." "And Dad?" Tyrell asked. "We tell him it's for her own good," Skylar said. "We tell him she needs professional help. If he resists, we tell the doctors he is losing it too, that he is hallucinating a daughter. Maybe we can get a 2-for-1 deal and lock them both up tonight. Then the house is ours by morning." I took the earbud out and shoved it into my pocket. My heart was hammering a rhythm of pure rage. They were going to gaslight me. They were going to use the system to bury us both. I looked at the glass of water in my hand. I wanted to throw it against the wall. I wanted to storm into the dining room and tear them apart with my bare hands. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed them to think they were winning. I needed them to make a mistake. I took a deep breath, composing my face into the mask of the confused, weary old man. I walked back into the living room. Harper was lying on the sofa, watching Tyrell sweep up the glass. She looked up at me, her eyes asking a silent question. I handed her the water. I leaned down, pretending to adjust the blanket around her shoulders. My lips brushed her ear. "They cut your brakes," I whispered, barely audible. "They are calling a doctor to have you committed tonight. Do not eat the soup." Harper stiffened. She gave the slightest nod. I stood up and turned to face my son and daughter-in-law. Tyrell was dumping the glass shards into the trash. Skylar was coming in from the kitchen with a steaming bowl on a tray. She was smiling. It was the smile of a shark, scenting blood in the water. "Here we go," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Nice hot soup. This will make you feel so much better." I watched her set the tray down. I watched her smooth her dress. I watched the monsters I had welcomed into my home prepare to devour us. And I realized that the war hadn't just started. We were already under siege. But they had made one fatal error. They assumed the old man was helpless. They didn't know that before I was a carpenter, before I was a father, I was an engineer. And I knew exactly how to dismantle a structure until it collapsed on top of itself. I sat down in my armchair, watching the steam rise from the poisoned bowl. "Thank you, Skylar," I said. "You are too good to us." "You have no idea," she replied. Before I continue, let me know in the comments if you have ever had to smile at someone you knew was lying to your face. Hit like if you want to see exactly how I turned their trap against them. Because the night was young, and I had a few tricks of my own. Skylar walked back into the living room carrying a silver tray. The porcelain bowls rattled slightly against the metal, a subtle vibration that betrayed the tremor in her hands. She had composed herself since the initial shock of our arrival. Her face was now a portrait of contrition, her eyes wide and pleading, her lips curved into a smile that was meant to be apologetic, but looked more like a rictus of fear. "I am so sorry for earlier, Samuel," she said, her voice soft and trembling. The steam rising from the chicken soup carried the scent of thyme and roasted garlic, masking something sharper underneath. I just panicked. Seeing a stranger claiming to be family, well, it was a lot to process. But we are family, and we take care of each other. I made this special. It is my grandmother's recipe. It will help everyone settle down. She placed a bowl in front of Harper, and another on the side table next to my armchair. She didn't serve herself. She didn't serve Tyrell. "Please, eat," she urged, clasping her hands together. "We can talk about everything in the morning, after everyone has had a good night of rest." I looked at the soup. It looked rich and creamy, with large chunks of chicken and carrots floating in the broth. It looked like comfort in a bowl. But as I leaned forward, pretending to smell the aroma, a familiar scent hit the back of my throat. It was faint, buried under the heavy garlic, but unmistakable to a man who had spent 40 years working with industrial filtration systems and chemical solvents. Bitter almonds. It wasn't just almonds. It was a specific chemical compound often found in high-grade industrial sedatives and deliriants. In my days designing valves for water treatment plants, we used a similar compound to neutralize certain bacteria, but in high doses, it attacked the nervous system. It caused confusion, hallucinations, and compliance. It was the kind of thing that could make a person sign a will they didn't understand or admit to crimes they didn't commit. Skylar hadn't just made soup, she had made a chemical weapon. "Thank you, Skylar," I said, keeping my face impassive. "This smells delicious." Harper reached for her spoon, her hand shaking. I cleared my throat loudly, a sharp, guttural sound that made her freeze. "Harper, honey," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "Before you eat, why don't you go wash up in the downstairs bathroom? You have dirt on your hands. We are civilized people here." Harper hesitated, looking at the soup, then at me. She saw the warning in my eyes. She nodded slowly, putting the spoon down. "Yes, Daddy, I will go wash up." She stood up and walked toward the hallway. Skylar watched her go, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "It will get cold," Skylar said. I picked up my bowl. "I'm going to eat mine on the back porch," I said, standing up. "The fresh air helps my digestion. You know how my stomach gets when I am stressed." Skylar moved to block me, her hand reaching out. "Oh, Samuel, just eat here. It is more comfortable." I sidestepped her, moving with the stubborn momentum of an old man who is set in his ways. "I need the air, Skylar. I will be right back." I walked through the kitchen and out the back door before she could argue further. The night air was cool and crisp. The backyard was dark, illuminated only by the spill of light from the kitchen window. I walked to the edge of the patio, where the shadows were deepest. For years, a stray tabby cat had frequented my yard. Tyrell hated it. He had tried to kick it more than once. I called him Buster. I fed him scraps when no one was looking. Tonight, Buster was sitting on the fence, his yellow eyes watching me expectantly. I looked at the soup. I looked at the cat. It was a cruel thing to do. It was a hard thing to do, but I needed to know. I needed absolute certainty before I made my next move. This wasn't just about suspicion anymore. This was about survival. "Here you go, boy," I whispered, pouring the contents of the bowl onto a flat stone near the fence. The cat jumped down, purring. He approached the food and began to eat hungrily. I stood there in the dark, counting the seconds. 1 minute passed. The cat finished the food and sat back, licking his paws. 2 minutes. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just garlic and paranoia. Then it happened. 10 minutes later, the cat stood up to walk away. He took 2 steps and stumbled. He let out a low, guttural yowl that sounded like a child crying. His body seized up. He fell onto his side, his legs twitching violently. He clawed at the air, fighting invisible enemies. Foam gathered at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a peaceful sleep. It was a violent, terrified descent into madness. I watched until he stopped moving. My heart was cold as ice. They hadn't just tried to sedate us. They had used a dosage that could kill a small animal in minutes. For a human, it would fry the neural pathways. It would turn a sane person into a raving lunatic within hours. It was the perfect setup for a psychiatric commitment. I picked up the empty bowl. I wiped the residue with a napkin I had in my pocket. I took a deep breath, composing my features into a mask of satisfaction. I walked back into the house. The kitchen was empty. I walked into the dining room. Harper was back on the sofa, looking pale and frightened. Her bowl was still on the table, untouched. Skylar was nowhere to be seen, likely upstairs preparing the guest room or calling her doctor friend. But Tyrell was there. My son was standing by the table. He was holding a ladle. He was eating directly from the serving tureen that Skylar had left on the sideboard. He was shoveling the soup into his mouth with a frantic, nervous energy. He looked up when I entered, a guilty expression on his face, broth dripping from his chin. "I'm starving, Dad," he mumbled, swallowing a large mouthful. "Skylar didn't make dinner for me. She was too busy with everything. This is actually really good." I stopped. I looked at the empty bowl in my hand. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had cut the brake lines on a young woman's car and plotted to steal my life's work. He was eating the poison intended for me. He was consuming the very weapon they had forged to destroy my mind. A father's instinct is to protect, to slap the spoon away, to call 911, to scream. But I remembered the conversation I had overheard. I remembered him agreeing to gaslight me. I remembered him saying my death wasn't personal. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply watched. "Is there any left?" I asked, my voice calm, flat. Tyrell nodded, taking another spoonful. "Yeah, plenty. Skylar made a huge batch. Do you want more?" "No," I said. "I'm full." It was very rich. I walked past him, placing my empty bowl in the sink. I went into the living room and sat down next to Harper. She looked at me, her eyes darting to the kitchen where Tyrell was scraping the bottom of the tureen. "He is eating it," she whispered, horrified. I patted her hand. "Hush now. We need to rest. It is going to be a long night." We went upstairs. Skylar had prepared the guest room for Harper, locking the window from the outside, I noticed. I went to my own room. I locked the door. I pushed a chair under the handle. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to the house. For hours, it was silent. Then, around 3 a.m., it started. It began with a low moan, coming from the master bedroom down the hall. Then, a thud. Then, a scream that tore through the silence of the suburban night like a serrated knife. "Get them off me! Get them off!" I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. Harper was already there, standing in the doorframe of the guest room, her eyes wide. We walked toward the master bedroom. The door was open. The scene inside was like something out of a horror movie. Tyrell was on the floor, thrashing wildly. He had torn his pajamas. He was clawing at his own face, leaving long red scratches down his cheeks. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated so much that his eyes looked entirely black. He was looking at the ceiling, screaming at things that only he could see. "The spiders! The spiders are eating my money!" Skylar was backed into the corner of the room, clutching her silk robe around her. She was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't looking at Tyrell with concern. She was looking at him with confusion and guilt. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew the dosage she had put in that soup. She knew it was meant to shatter a mind, not feed it. "Do something!" Skylar shrieked when she saw me. "He is having a seizure. Call an ambulance." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I looked at my son, who was now curling into a fetal position, sobbing about demons coming to collect his debt. "He looks like he is having a bad dream," I said calmly. "Maybe he just ate something that disagreed with him." Skylar whipped her head toward me. Her eyes narrowed. "You," she hissed. "You did this." "I did nothing," I replied, my voice cold steel. "I ate my soup. I went to bed. Terrell was the one who was hungry. He finished the pot. Did you put something in the soup, Skylar? Is there a reason he is seeing monsters?" Skylar froze. She opened her mouth to accuse me, to scream, but she closed it. She couldn't say it. She couldn't admit that the soup was laced with a high-grade hallucinogen without admitting to attempted murder. She was trapped in her own web. Terrell let out another blood-curdling scream. "They are burning me. The fire is everywhere." I walked over to him. I looked down. He grabbed my ankle, his grip bruising. Dad, help me. The devil is here. He has your face." I pulled my leg free. "I am not the devil, son," I said softly. "I am just the man you tried to kill." I turned to Skylar. "You better get him some water. It looks like he is going to be like this for a while." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the chaos behind me. I went downstairs to the kitchen and started the coffee maker. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of violent orange and red. I poured a cup of black coffee. I stood by the window, watching the dead cat in the yard, stiff and cold in the morning light. Upstairs, the screaming continued. Downstairs, I took a sip of coffee. It was going to be a beautiful day. The trap had been sprung, but not on the prey they intended. And this was just the beginning. Before I tell you what happened when the doctor arrived, leave a comment below. What would you do if you caught your family trying to poison you? Hit subscribe, because the doctor's visit, that was when things truly went off the rails. Dr. Evans arrived at 10 in the morning, carrying a leather medical bag and an expression of professional annoyance. Skylar had called him under the pretense of an emergency, but her real agenda was written all over her frantic movements. She met him at the door, blocking his view of the living room, her voice a stage whisper that carried through the entire ground floor. "Doctor, thank God you are here. It is Samuel. He has finally snapped. He is dangerous. He has done something to Tyrell. You have to sign the commitment papers today before he hurts anyone else." I sat at the kitchen island sipping black coffee and reading the local newspaper. I was dressed in a clean flannel shirt and pressed trousers, the picture of a sane retired gentleman enjoying his morning. Under the dining room table 6 feet away, my son Tyrell was curled into a tight ball, shivering violently. He was wearing only his boxer shorts and one sock. He was muttering to himself, his eyes darting around the room, tracking invisible threats. "The spiders," he whispered. "The spiders have teeth." Dr. Evans pushed past Skylar and walked into the room. He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at me calmly, turning a page of the paper. Then he looked at Tyrell, who was currently trying to claw through the hardwood floor with his fingernails to escape the demons in his head. "Good morning, doctor," I said, lowering the paper. "Would you like a cup of coffee? It is a fresh pot." Dr. Evans blinked, looking from me to my son. "Mr. Bennett, you seem remarkably composed for a man whose son is having a psychotic break." "I am just keeping calm, doctor," I replied. "Skylar seems to have enough panic for all of us. I think Tyrell ate something that disagreed with him last night. He has been like this for hours." Skylar rushed into the room, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He did this," she shrieked. "He poisoned him. He is the one who needs to be locked up, doctor. Look at him. He is smiling. He is a psychopath." Tyrell let out a blood-curdling scream and scrambled out from under the table. He grabbed Dr. Evans by the legs, using the doctor as a human shield against the empty air. "She is the witch," he howled, pointing at Skylar. "She made the soup. She put the fire in the bowl. Don't let her burn me." Dr. Evans peeled Tyrell off his leg with a look of distaste. He knelt down, checking Tyrell's dilated pupils and racing pulse. He stood up and turned to Skylar, his face cold. "Mrs. Bennett, your husband is displaying classic signs of a drug-induced hallucination or a severe mental breakdown. Your father-in-law, on the other hand, appears to be the only stable person in this room. But he is the one," Skylar stammered, her plan crumbling before her eyes. "You have to sign the papers. He is senile. He is dangerous." The doctor snapped his bag shut. The only danger I see here is neglect. If you do not get your husband to a hospital for a toxicology screen immediately, I will be forced to report this situation to the authorities myself. As for Samuel, I see no grounds for commitment. In fact, I question whether this environment is safe for him." Skylar went pale. Hospital. If they took Terrell to a hospital and ran blood work, they would find the traces of the industrial sedative she had stolen. Attempted murder charges would follow within the hour. "No hospital," she said quickly, her voice dropping to a desperate hiss. "We will handle it. Just give him a sedative. He will sleep it off. Please, doctor." Dr. Evans looked at her with deep suspicion. He wrote a prescription and handed it to her without a word. "If he is not better in 12 hours, you call an ambulance, or I will call the police." He looked at me one last time, nodding respectfully before walking out the door. Skylar stood there, clutching the prescription, trembling with rage. Her plan to lock me away had backfired spectacularly. Now the medical record showed that she was the unstable one, living in a house of chaos. That night, the house became a theater of war, and I was the director. Harper and I sat in the guest room plotting the next phase. Tyrell was finally asleep upstairs, knocked out by the heavy sedatives the doctor had prescribed. Skylar was alone, pacing the living room trying to salvage her scheme. She thought the worst was over. She was wrong. "It is time to make her doubt her own mind," I told Harper, handing her a set of Bluetooth speakers the size of buttons. "I installed these while they were at the movies last week. Placed them in the air vents in the master bedroom in the hallway." Harper grinned, a fierce expression on her bruised face. She moved like a ghost, silent and quick. We spent the next hour rearranging Skylar's reality. We took her car keys from the hook by the door and placed them inside the freezer. We moved her phone from the charger to the bathroom sink. We took the family photos on the mantle and turned them all face down. Small things, insignificant things, but when they pile up, they create a fracture in the mind. At 2 a.m., I activated the program I had written on my tablet. I had taken the audio from the hidden microphones, the recordings of Skylar whispering to Tyrell about cutting the brake lines and killing Harper. I had isolated her voice, removed the background noise, and set it on a loop. I pressed play. From the vents in her bedroom, a whisper drifted out, soft as a breath, but clear as a bell. "Dead in a ditch." I watched the camera feed on my tablet. Skylar shot up in bed, eyes wide. She looked around the dark room. "Who is there?" she whispered. "Dead in a ditch," the voice repeated, coming from the hallway this time. Skylar scrambled out of bed, grabbing a heavy brass lamp. She walked into the hallway. "Is someone there? Samuel, is that you?" No answer, just the silence of the house. She walked toward the stairs. "Cut the brakes," the voice whispered from the vent right above her head. Skylar screamed, swinging the lamp at the empty air. She backed away, hyperventilating. She ran to the kitchen to get water. She opened the freezer to get ice and found her car keys sitting on top of the frozen peas. She stared at them, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the glass. It shattered on the floor. "I am losing it," she muttered to herself, sliding down the cabinet to the floor. "I am losing my mind." I walked into the kitchen wearing my pajamas, rubbing my eyes as if I had just woken up. "Skylar," I asked, my voice full of concern. "Are you all right?" I heard a scream. She looked up at me, her eyes wild. "Did you hear it? Did you hear the voices?" I looked around the empty kitchen. "I didn't hear anything, Skylar. Just you screaming. Are you feeling okay? You know, stress can make people imagine things. Maybe you should see Dr. Evans yourself." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw true fear in her eyes. Not fear of getting caught, but fear that her own mind was betraying her. She stood up and ran back upstairs, locking the bedroom door. I smiled. The seed was planted. She was no longer the predator. She was the prey in a haunted house of her own making. But fear wasn't enough. Fear makes people erratic. I needed Skylar focused. I needed her greedy. I needed to dangle a prize so big she would forget about locking me up and focus entirely on trying to steal it. It was time to reveal the backstory I had hidden for 40 years. The next morning I went into my study. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk, the one Skylar had tried to pick a dozen times. I took out a file folder. Inside was a document I had forged the night before, using old letterhead from my engineering days. It looked authentic, aged, and official. Title: Transfer of ownership for hydraulic flow control valve, patent, US 9844. Estimated monthly royalties, $62,000. Beneficiary, Samuel Bennett. I left the document on top of the desk, just slightly covered by a stack of bills. I left the study door ajar. Then I went out to the garden to prune the roses, making sure Skylar saw me leave. It took less than 10 minutes. My phone alerted me to movement in the study. I opened the camera feed. Skylar was there. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from the sleepless night. She was rifling through the papers on my desk, looking for anything she could use to gain power of attorney. Then she saw it. She pulled the document out. She read it once, she read it twice. Her mouth fell open. She pulled out her phone and opened the calculator app. She typed in the numbers. 60,000 a month, 700,000 a year, millions over a decade. She dropped into my desk chair, staring at the paper. The fear in her face vanished, replaced by a hunger so intense it distorted her features. She realized that the old man she was trying to throw into a nursing home was a gold mine. If she committed me now, the state might get involved in my assets. If she declared me incompetent, a court-appointed trustee might see this document. But if she kept me here, if she manipulated me, if she got me to sign a power of attorney voluntarily, she would control a fortune. She ran out of the room, clutching the paper. She didn't go to the police. She didn't go to the doctor. She ran upstairs to wake up Tyrell. I walked back into the house, wiping the dirt from my hands. I listened from the bottom of the stairs. "Tyrell, wake up," she was hissing. "Look at this. He is not poor. He is rich, Tyrell, filthy rich. We can't send him away. We have to keep him here. We have to make him happy. We have to get him to sign this over to us before he dies." I went into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. The game had changed. They wouldn't try to kill me today. They wouldn't try to lock me up. They were going to try to charm me. They were going to try to be the perfect children, because now they knew I was the goose that laid the golden eggs. And that was exactly where I wanted them. Close enough to strike, blinded by greed. Before I tell you what happened when they invited her parents over for dinner, hit the like button. Let me know in the comments if you would hide a fortune to test your family's loyalty. Because the dinner party that was coming up, that was going to be the main event. Skylar told me we were having company. She didn't ask. She informed me. Her parents were coming to dinner. She said it with a smile that showed too many teeth. She said they wanted to meet the man who raised such a wonderful son. I knew better. They were coming to inspect the merchandise. They were the closers. Skylar had found the patent document in my study. She knew I was sitting on a gold mine. Now she needed the heavy artillery to intimidate me into signing it over. I put on my best Sunday suit. It was old. The elbows were worn shiny. It smelled slightly of mothballs. I wanted to look like a relic. I wanted them to see a man who was past his prime, a man who needed guidance. Harper tied my tie. Her hands were steady now. The bruises on her face were fading into ugly yellow splotches, but her eyes were sharp. "Be careful with them, Samuel," she whispered. "Skylar calls them the vultures." I patted her hand. "Vultures only eat the dead," I said. "I am still very much alive." The doorbell rang at 7 sharp. Skylar and Tyrell rushed to answer it. I stood in the hallway, leaning heavily on my cane. I didn't need the cane. I could still run a mile in 8 minutes, but the cane made people underestimate me. Skylar's parents swept in like a cold front. Richard and Victoria Sterling. They were white, wealthy, and wore their entitlement like armor. Richard was a large man with a red face and a suit that cost more than my truck. Victoria was thin, sharp, and draped in silver jewelry that clinked when she moved. They didn't look at Tyrell. They barely looked at Skylar. Their eyes went straight to the house, inspecting the crown molding, the floors, the furniture, evaluating, calculating. Then their eyes landed on me. "There he is," Richard boomed, his voice filling the entryway. "The man of the hour. Skylar tells us you have had quite a week, Samuel." He didn't offer his hand. He handed me his coat. "Here you go, old boy. Hang that up for me, will you? Be careful with it. It is cashmere." I took the coat. I felt the weight of the insult settling in my gut. He thought I was the help. In his world, black men of my age opened doors and took coats. They didn't own patents. They didn't outsmart predators. I bowed my head slightly. "Yes, sir," I mumbled, my voice raspy and weak. "Very nice coat, sir." I shuffled to the closet. I heard Victoria whisper to Skylar, "He seems feeble, dear. Are you sure he is competent to sign the papers?" "He has his moments, Mom," Skylar whispered back. "But he is lucid enough. Just be nice to him. We need him to trust us." I hung up the coat. I checked the pockets. Nothing but a gold lighter and a receipt for a steak dinner for two that cost $600. I left them there. I walked into the dining room where the sharks were gathering. The dinner was a master class in condescension. Skylar had catered the meal. Roast duck, truffle mashed potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise. Food meant to impress. Food meant to show that she belonged in their world, even if she had married into mine. I sat at the end of the table. Harper sat next to me, silent and watchful. The Sterlings ignored her completely after Skylar introduced her as a distant relative staying for a few days. To them, she was invisible. I was the target. "So Samuel," Richard said, cutting into his duck, "Skylar tells me you used to be a handyman, fixed toilets and porches, that sort of thing." "I was a carpenter, sir," I said, keeping my eyes on my plate. "I worked with wood." "Quaint," Victoria said, taking a sip of white wine. "It is so nice to work with your hands. So simple. No stress of the corporate world. We have a gardener who is just like you. He works so hard. You people are always so resilient, aren't you?" You people. The phrase hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Tyrell flinched. He looked at his plate. He knew. He knew I hated that kind of language. But he said nothing. He wanted the money too much to defend his father. I smiled a vacant, senile smile. "Yes, ma'am, hard work is good for the soul. That is what my daddy always said." Richard laughed. A loud, barking sound. "Well, your daddy was right, but smart work pays the bills. Speaking of which, Skylar showed us some interesting paperwork. It seems you have come into some assets recently. A patent?" I looked up, blinking rapidly. "Oh, that, yes. Just a little thing I drew up years ago. I didn't think it was worth much." "Not worth much?" Richard snorted. "Samuel, that patent is a cash cow. But you need to be careful. Intellectual property is a shark tank. You need protection. You need management. Skylar tells me you have been managing it yourself. That is dangerous for a man of your age and background. You don't understand the legalities. You don't understand equities or liability." I nodded slowly, pretending to be confused. "Equities? Is that like horses?" Victoria giggled, hiding her mouth behind a napkin. "Oh, bless his heart. No, Samuel. Equities are stocks, money. We are trying to say that we can help you. Richard has a team of lawyers. If you sign management over to Tyrell and Skylar, we can ensure the money grows. We can put you in a very nice facility, top-notch care, bingo night." They were doing it. They were pitching my own imprisonment to me as a luxury vacation. They wanted to take the patent, put me in a home, and drain the accounts dry. I reached for the bottle of red wine. It was a 1982 Chateau Margaux. Skylar had stolen it from my private collection in the basement. A $500 bottle. "Let me pour you some more, ma'am," I said, standing up shakily. "Oh, how sweet," Victoria said, holding out her glass. I moved the bottle toward her. My hand trembled. It was a calculated tremor, a spasm of the wrist. "Oops," I said. The bottle tipped. A stream of dark red wine shot out. It didn't go into the glass. It went directly onto Victoria's lap. It soaked into the cream-colored silk of her designer dress, spreading like a gunshot wound. Victoria shrieked. She jumped up, knocking her chair over. "My dress! You idiot! You clumsy old fool! This is a $5,000 dress!" She swiped at the stain, making it worse. Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Look what you did!" he roared. "Can't you do anything right?" Skylar was paralyzed. She looked at her mother, then at me. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw me out. But she saw the patent document in her mind. She saw the millions. "It was an accident, Mom," she stammered. "He is shaky. He didn't mean it. Samuel, go get a towel." I stood there, the empty bottle in my hand, looking lost and pathetic. "I am so sorry, ma'am," I mumbled. "My hands, they just don't work like they used to. I thought I had it." "Get away from me," Victoria hissed, backing away. "You have ruined it. You have ruined everything." I sat back down. I didn't go get a towel. I watched them scramble. It was satisfying. But it wasn't enough. I needed to break Richard. I needed to show him that the simple carpenter knew more about his world than he did. After 20 minutes of cleanup and Victoria changing into one of Skylar's robes, the dinner resumed. The mood was icy. Richard was drinking heavily now. His face was flushed. He wanted to assert dominance. He wanted to remind everyone in the room that he was the alpha male. He started talking about his latest project, a 40-story luxury condo complex downtown, the biggest contract of his career. "We are breaking ground next month," he bragged, pouring himself another glass of my wine. "It is going to be magnificent, floor-to-ceiling glass, rooftop infinity pool. We had to cut some corners to make the budget work, of course. The steel prices are killing us, but my engineer found a workaround." "Oh," I asked, my voice suddenly clear and steady. "What kind of workaround?" Richard looked at me, annoyed that I was speaking. "Technical stuff, Samuel. Over your head. We switched from ASTMA 992 structural steel to a cheaper imported alloy for the secondary support beams. Saved us $2 million. The inspectors won't notice the difference. It holds the load just fine." I leaned forward. I stopped shaking. I stopped blinking. I looked him dead in the eye. "Actually, Richard, that is incorrect." The table went silent. Tyrell looked up, his eyes wide. He knew that tone. That was the tone I used when I caught him lying about his homework. "Excuse me?" Richard laughed, a nervous sound. "What did you say?" "I said you are wrong," I continued, my voice hard as iron. "If you switch to a non-standard imported alloy for secondary supports in a structure over 30 stories, you compromise the lateral torsional buckling resistance. A 992 steel has a yield strength of 50 kSI. Most cheap imports fluctuate between 30 and 36 kSI. Under wind load or a minor seismic event, those secondary beams will fatigue. They won't just bend, they will shear. And when they shear, the primary load transfers to the outer columns, which aren't designed for that stress vector." I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. "Your building won't just crack, Richard. It will pancake. You are building a tomb, and if you sign off on those prints, you are committing negligent homicide." Richard stared at me. His mouth hung open. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by shock. He looked at Skylar. "Who is this?" he whispered. "How does he know that?" Skylar was pale. She realized in that moment that she had made a terrible mistake. She realized the old man wasn't senile. "I read," I said, shrugging, returning to my character but keeping the edge in my voice. "I read a lot of magazines, carpentry, engineering. It is all the same, really, just physics and gravity." Richard stood up. He was furious. He had been humiliated by the help in front of his family. "You don't know what you are talking about," he shouted, pointing a finger at me. "You are a nobody, a wood chipper. Do not presume to lecture me on my business." My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single vibration. I pulled it out. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from Franklin Moss, my lawyer. The text read, "Acquisition complete. We have purchased the distressed debt portfolio of Sterling Construction. You are now the majority creditor. We have the leverage. Executing foreclosure proceedings tomorrow morning at 900. I smiled, a real smile, cold and sharp. "I didn't presume, Richard," I said, standing up. "I just wanted to warn you, because when that project gets shut down tomorrow morning due to financial insolvency, I didn't want you to be surprised." "What insolvency?" Richard demanded. "My company is fine." "Check your email tomorrow," I said. I looked at Skylar. I looked at Tyrell. "The dinner is over. Get these people out of my house." Skylar stood up, trembling. "Samuel, you can't talk to my father like that. Apologize." I turned and walked toward the stairs, Harper following close behind me. "I don't apologize to vultures," I said over my shoulder. "I starve them." I went to my room and locked the door. Downstairs, I heard shouting. I heard Richard screaming at Skylar, asking who the hell I really was. I heard Tyrell trying to calm them down. I sat on my bed and looked at the phone. Franklin Moss was a shark. He had moved faster than I expected. By tomorrow morning, Richard Sterling wouldn't be building skyscrapers. He would be fighting to keep his own house. The trap had snapped shut on the parents. Now it was time to deal with the children. And Tyrell, my son. He was going to be the hardest one to break. Because despite everything, a part of me still remembered holding him when he was a baby. But that baby was gone. The man downstairs was a stranger, and tomorrow I was going to introduce him to reality. Before I tell you about the knife in the garage, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to outsmart someone who thought they were better than you? Hit subscribe, because the next part, that is when things got violent. I woke up to the sound of crashing furniture. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of a man who had finally run out of options. Tyrell had spent the last 24 hours in a drug-induced haze, mumbling about spiders and fire. But now the chemicals had cleared, leaving behind only a raw, desperate rage. I walked into the hallway just in time to see him dragging Harper toward the door that led to the garage. She was fighting him, kicking and scratching, but Tyrell was fueled by adrenaline and panic. He looked at her not with confusion anymore, but with recognition. The fog had lifted, and he finally saw who she really was. "You are not just some random grifter, are you?" Tyrell screamed, shoving her against the wall. "I know you. I saw your picture in Richard's office years ago. You are the mistake. You are the little secret Richard Sterling paid to make disappear." Harper gasped, her eyes wide with terror. Tyrell wasn't hallucinating anymore. He had put the pieces together. The girl Skylar had chosen to play my fake daughter wasn't a stranger. She was Skylar's own half-sister, the illegitimate child Richard Sterling had abandoned to protect his precious reputation. That was why Skylar hated her. That was why they picked her. She was disposable to them because she was the stain on their perfect family portrait. "You are the bastard child," Tyrell yelled, his face inches from hers. "You are the reason Skylar is so paranoid. You were supposed to take the money and vanish, but you got greedy, didn't you? You came here to ruin us." He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her into the garage, kicking the door shut behind them. I heard the lock click. I heard Harper scream. I didn't run. Running is for people who haven't prepared. I walked to the garage door. I could hear them inside, the sound of metal scraping against metal. Tyrell was looking for a weapon. My workshop was in there. Hammers, saws, chisels. It was a room full of things that could end a life. I took my phone out of my pocket. I opened the neighborhood community app. It was a small digital space where the suburban moms complained about unkempt lawns and suspicious vans. But today, it was going to be my courtroom. I hit the button that said Go Live. I waited for the connection to stabilize. I saw the viewer count tick up. 1, 5, 10. People were bored on a Wednesday morning. They wanted drama. I was about to give them a crime scene. I unlocked the garage door with my master key. I stepped inside. The air in the garage smelled of sawdust and old gasoline. Tyrell had Harper pinned against my workbench. He was holding a utility knife, the heavy-duty kind I used to cut drywall. The blade was extended, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He had it pressed against the soft skin of her throat. A thin line of blood was already welling up around the steel. "Tell me who else knows," Tyrell hissed, his back to me. "Tell me or I will cut it out of you. I faked those DNA results to get Dad's money, not to deal with your family drama. I should have made sure the car crash finished you off." He was admitting it. The DNA forgery, the attempted murder. He was confessing everything because he thought he was alone in a soundproof box. He thought he was the predator in the dark. "Tyrell," I said, my voice booming off the concrete walls. He spun around, but he didn't drop the knife. He kept it pressed to Harper's neck, using her as a shield. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and manic. He looked like a cornered rat. "Stay back, Dad," he screamed. "Stay back or I will do it. I swear to God I will do it. She is nothing. She is a ghost. Nobody will miss her." I didn't step forward. I didn't raise my hands in surrender. I simply held up my phone screen facing him. The little red light was blinking steadily. "I am not going to fight you, son," I said calmly, "and I am not going to beg. But I think you should know that you have an audience." Tyrell blinked, confused. "What?" "I am live streaming, Tyrell," I said, gesturing to the phone. "We are live on the Oak Creek Neighborhood Facebook group. Right now, 342 of our neighbors are watching you hold a knife to a young woman's throat. Mrs. Higgins from down the street just commented that she is calling 911. Mr. Henderson says you look like a maniac. And look, the viewer count just hit 400. Tyrell stared at the phone. He squinted, trying to see the screen. He saw the stream of comments scrolling up the side. He saw his own face, distorted by rage and fear, broadcast to the world. The reality of the modern world crashed down on him. He could kill Harper. He could kill me, but he couldn't kill the signal. He couldn't kill the cloud. The evidence was already out there, backed up on 1,000 servers, watched by hundreds of witnesses. He wasn't committing a secret crime. He was performing a public execution. The color drained from his face. His hands started to shake violently. The knife wobbled against Harper's skin. "Put the knife down, Tyrell," I said, my voice hard as iron. "Or be the star of the viral video that sends you to death row. It is your choice." He looked at the phone. He looked at me. He looked at the knife in his hand as if he didn't know how it got there. The fight went out of him. The monster shrank back into the cowardly boy who used to cheat at cards. He dropped the knife. It clattered onto the concrete floor. Harper shoved him away, gasping for air, clutching her bleeding neck. She scrambled behind me, using my body as a barrier. Tyrell collapsed to his knees, sobbing. "Dad, I didn't mean it. I just wanted the money. Skylar made me do it. She said we needed the money. I didn't turn off the stream." I walked closer, keeping the camera trained on his weeping face. I wanted every tear, every snot-nosed confession documented. "Where is the money, Tyrell?" I asked. "Not the patent money. The money Skylar stole from the mortgage. The $300,000 you two took out against my house while I was sleeping. Where did she hide it?" Tyrell looked up, his face a mask of misery. He knew it was over. He knew Skylar couldn't protect him. He knew his father-in-law was ruined. He had one card left to play, and that was cooperation. "She didn't spend it," he wept. "She didn't invest it. She hid it. She put it in a safety deposit box. But not in her name." "Where?" I demanded. "She gave it to him," Tyrell whispered. "She gave it to Miller." The name hit me like a physical blow. Officer Miller, the cop who had called me, the cop who had threatened to arrest me, the cop who had tried to frame me for kidnapping. "Why would she give it to a cop?" I asked. "He is not just a cop," Tyrell said, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "He is her boyfriend, Dad. They have been sleeping together for 2 years. He is the one who helped us plan this. He is the one who falsified the police report about Harper. He is the one holding the cash." I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. This wasn't just a family betrayal. This was a conspiracy. My daughter-in-law wasn't just greedy. She was cheating on my son with the very man she had hired to destroy me. And my son, the fool, had gone along with it, blinded by promises of a payday that was never coming. I looked at the phone. I ended the stream. The neighbors had seen enough to call the cavalry, but they didn't need to hear this part. This part was personal. I looked down at my son. He was broken. He was pathetic. And he was useful. "Get up," I ordered. Tyrell stood up, shaking. "What are you going to do? Are you going to call the police?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The police are already involved, son. Miller is the police. If we call 911, who do you think shows up? His friends, his partners. No, we aren't calling the police." I turned to Harper. She was pressing a rag to her neck, but her eyes were burning with a need for vengeance that matched my own. "We are going to get my money back," I said, "and we are going to take down a dirty cop." Tyrell looked terrified. "Dad, you can't go after Miller. He is dangerous. He has a gun. He will kill you." I walked over to my workbench. I picked up a heavy wrench, weighing it in my hand. "He has a gun," I said, "but I have something better. I have the truth, and I have nothing left to lose." I grabbed Tyrell by the collar of his shirt and dragged him toward the truck. Harper followed, grabbing the utility knife from the floor just in case. "We are going to pay Skylar a visit," I said, "and you are going to tell her exactly what she wants to hear. You are going to tell her the old man is dead." Tyrell's eyes went wide. "Why?" "Because," I said, pushing him out the door. "When people think they have won, they get careless. And when Skylar goes to celebrate with her boyfriend, I want to be the one to pop the champagne." Before I tell you what we found in that luxury apartment, hit the subscribe button. Have you ever discovered a betrayal so deep it changed who you were? Let me know in the comments. Because what I found in Officer Miller's apartment wasn't just money. It was the blueprint for my murder. We got into the truck. I looked at my house one last time, the place where I had raised my family. It was just wood and brick now. The home was gone. All that was left was the mission. "Drive," I told Tyrell, tossing him the keys. "You know where she is. Take me to them. Tyrell started the engine. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely shift gears, but he drove. He drove us toward the city, toward the high-rise condos where the corrupt and the greedy hid their sins. I sat in the passenger seat checking my phone. Franklin Moss had sent another text. Foreclosure initiated. Richard Sterling is currently screaming in the lobby of my office. Phase 1 complete, ready for Phase 2. I smiled. Phase 2 was just beginning, and Officer Miller had no idea that the old carpenter he had threatened was coming to dismantle his life piece by piece. "Get ready, Harper," I said. "We are going hunting." She nodded, her blue eyes hard as diamonds. "I am ready, Dad." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I actually felt like a father, not by blood, but by battle. We were soldiers in the same trench, and we were about to go over the top. Tyrell drove the truck like a hearse, carrying his own corpse. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight I could hear the leather creaking under the pressure of his knuckles. We were following Skylar's silver sedan through the city streets, keeping 2 cars back just like I had taught him when I took him hunting as a boy. But we weren't hunting deer today. We were hunting the truth. The city lights blurred past us, streaks of neon reflecting off the wet pavement. Harper sat in the back seat, silent and sharp as a blade, watching the road with the intensity of someone who knows her life depends on not missing a single detail. We tracked Skylar to the Obsidian Tower. It was one of those new, soulless high-rises that had sprouted up in the downtown district like glass weeds. It was the kind of place where people paid $3,000 a month for the privilege of not knowing their neighbors. Skylar pulled her car into the underground garage, but I told Tyrell to drive past. We couldn't risk the gate code. We parked in the alleyway across the street, tucked behind a dumpster that smelled of rotting vegetables and old coffee. It was a fitting smell for the business we were about to conduct. I pulled a pair of heavy-duty binoculars from the glove compartment. I kept them there for bird watching, a hobby I picked up to keep my blood pressure down. Tonight, they were instruments of war. I rolled down the window and scanned the building. I didn't have to search for long. Skylar was predictable. She liked views. She liked to look down on people. I scanned the penthouse levels. There, on the 20th floor, the lights flicked on in a corner unit with floor-to-ceiling windows. I adjusted the focus. The room leaped into clarity. It was furnished in stark white leather and chrome, the kind of sterile luxury that screams new money. Skylar walked into the frame. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. She was carrying a large orange duffel bag. I recognized it immediately. It was my old camping bag, the one I used to pack for fishing trips with Tyrell when he was barely tall enough to hold a rod. Now it was stuffed with the $300,000 she had stolen from the mortgage on my home. She placed the bag on the kitchen island. She didn't open it immediately. She waited. She poured herself a glass of wine, her movements languid and relaxed. She was celebrating. She thought I was dead or defeated. She thought Tyrell was her loyal puppet. She had no idea we were 300 feet away, watching her life unravel through a pair of Nikon lenses. A man walked into the frame. He came from the bedroom, wearing a silk robe that hung open at the chest. He walked up behind Skylar and wrapped his arms around her waist. He buried his face in her neck. She leaned back into him, laughing. It was an intimate gesture. It was the move of a lover, not a business partner. "Tyrell," I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion. "Take the glasses. Look at the man." Tyrell shook his head. He didn't want to see. He wanted to believe she was just a thief. He didn't want to know she was a traitor. "Look," I commanded. He took the binoculars with trembling hands. He lifted them to his eyes. For a long moment, there was silence in the cab of the truck. Then, a sound escaped Tyrell's throat. It was a whimper, the sound a dog makes when you kick it. "It is Miller," he whispered. "It is the cop." I took the glasses back. I looked again. The man had turned. The harsh track lighting of the apartment illuminated his face perfectly. It was Officer Miller, the same man who had called me, the same man who had threatened to arrest me, the same man who had looked me in the eye at the station and accused me of being a monster. He wasn't just a corrupt cop taking a bribe. He was sleeping with my daughter-in-law. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a hydraulic press. This wasn't just Skylar's plan. It was his. He had the authority to fake police reports. He had the connections to get fake IDs. He was the muscle and the badge behind the operation. Skylar was the inside man, and Tyrell was the fool they had played from the start. Miller grabbed the orange bag. He unzipped it. He reached in and pulled out stacks of cash, wrapped in bank bands. He threw them into the air, making it rain money in the kitchen. Skylar laughed, clapping her hands. They kissed. It was a deep, passionate kiss over a pile of my stolen life savings. I looked at Tyrell. He was slumped against the steering wheel, tears streaming down his face. He wasn't crying because of the crime. He was crying because of the girl. Even after everything, after the poisoned soup and the knife in the garage, a part of him had still loved her. A part of him thought they were partners in crime. Now he knew he was just the getaway driver for his wife's affair. "She played you, son," I said. "She played us all. She didn't want the money for us. She wanted it for him. They were going to run away together once I was dead, and you were in prison for killing me." Tyrell looked at me. His eyes were dead. "What do we do, Dad? We can't call the police. He is the police." I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I had saved under the name The Cleaner. It wasn't a hitman. It was Franklin Moss, the most ruthless corporate attorney in the state. He picked up on the first ring. "Mr. Bennett." Franklin's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. "To what do I owe the pleasure of a call at this hour?" "It is time, Franklin," I said. "Activate the shadow protocol. Target is Skylar Bennett. Secondary target is Officer James Miller. I want the full package. Terrorist financing watch list, money laundering red flags. Freeze every asset that has touched their names in the last 10 years. And Franklin, do it now." "Consider it done," Franklin said. "I have been waiting for your signal. The trap is set." I hung up. I lifted the binoculars again. Inside the apartment, the party was in full swing. Miller was pouring champagne. Skylar had her laptop open on the counter. She was logging into her offshore account, the one she thought was secret. She was getting ready to transfer the remaining funds, the digital money she had siphoned from my retirement accounts over the last 6 months. I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard. She hit enter. She smiled, raising her glass to Miller. Then, her face changed. It happened in an instant. The smile vanished. She leaned closer to the screen. She tapped a key furiously. She frowned. Miller walked over, looking over her shoulder. He pointed at the screen. He looked confused. I knew exactly what they were seeing. A bright red banner across the banking portal. "Access denied. Account frozen by federal order. Code 99. Suspected terrorist financing activity. Contact authorities immediately." It was a lie, of course. They weren't terrorists. But Franklin Moss had friends in the Department of Homeland Security who owed him favors. He had flagged their accounts with a code that automatically locked down funds for 72 hours, pending investigation. No judge could unfreeze it tonight. No badge could override it. Their money, all of it, was trapped in digital purgatory. Panic began to set in inside the penthouse. Skylar was shouting now. I could see her mouth moving, her gestures wild. She grabbed her phone. She dialed a number. My phone didn't ring. She wasn't calling me. She was calling the bank. But Franklin had thought of that too. Her phone service had been flagged as part of the investigation. It was dead. No signal. Miller pulled out his phone. He tried to make a call. He looked at the screen, shook it, and threw it onto the couch. Dead zone. Franklin had a contact at the telecom provider who had initiated a localized SIM swap lock on their numbers. They were cut off. Skylar swept the champagne bottle off the counter. It smashed against the wall. She was screaming at Miller. She was pointing at the laptop. Miller was yelling back, his face turning a dark, ugly red. The lovers' quarrel had begun. The money was gone, and without the money, the love was evaporating like mist in the sun. I watched for another minute, savoring the chaos. Then, I lowered the binoculars. "Start the truck, Tyrell," I said. "Where are we going?" he asked, wiping his face. "We are going to introduce ourselves," I said. "They are confused. They don't know why their life is falling apart. I think it is only polite that we explain it to them." Harper leaned forward from the back seat. "Do you have a weapon, Samuel? Miller is a cop. He will have his service piece." I patted the pocket of my jacket. "I don't need a gun, Harper. I have something much more dangerous. I have the truth about where the rest of the bodies are buried. Miller thinks he is a predator. He doesn't know he has been swimming in a shark tank with a cut on his leg." We drove out of the alley. Tyrell pulled up to the front of the obsidian tower. I looked up at the penthouse one last time. The lights were flickering. They were running around like rats on a sinking ship. I turned to Tyrell. Listen to me closely. When we go up there, you say nothing. You do nothing. You let me handle Miller. You just look at your wife. Let her see you. Let her see that the husband she tried to destroy is the one standing over her grave. We walked into the lobby. The doorman tried to stop us. He saw my work clothes, Tyrell's tear-stained face, and Harper's bruises. He stepped forward, putting a hand up. "Sir, you can't come in here," he began. I didn't stop walking. I pulled out my phone and showed him the deed to the building. Or rather, the deed held by the shell company that I owned. "I am Samuel Bennett," I said without breaking stride. "I own this building, and I am going up to inspect Unit 2004. If you try to stop me, you will be looking for a job in the morning." The doorman froze. He looked at the digital document. He looked at me. He stepped aside. We got into the elevator. The numbers ticked up. 1, 5, 10, 15, 20. The doors opened. The hallway was quiet, plush carpet dampening our footsteps. We walked to door 2004. I could hear shouting from inside. Skylar was screaming that it was a setup. Miller was yelling that she had compromised him. I reached out and tried the handle. Locked. I looked at Harper. She pulled a small toolkit from her pocket. She had picked it up from my garage. She knelt down. 10 seconds later, there was a soft click. She stood up and nodded. I pushed the door open. The air inside smelled of expensive perfume and fear. Skylar and Miller were in the living room. They spun around as the door swung open. Miller reached for his hip, instinct taking over. But he wasn't wearing his belt. His gun was on the kitchen counter, 10 feet away. Skylar gasped. She looked at Tyrell. She looked at me. She looked at the ghost of the girl she thought she had killed. "Samuel," she breathed. I stepped into the room. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I spoke with the calm, measured tone of an engineer who has found the structural flaw in a bridge. "Hello, Skylar," I said. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Miller lunged for the counter. "Omega Red," I said clearly. Miller froze mid-step. He stumbled, catching himself on the sofa. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated terror. "How do you know that code?" he whispered. "Because, Officer Miller," I said, walking toward the piles of cash on the floor. "I designed the security system for the precinct you work in. I wrote the back doors, and I just sent your entire encrypted chat history with Skylar to the FBI." The color drained from his face. He knew what was in those chats. Murder plots, drug deals, money laundering. I sat down on the white leather sofa, right next to the pile of cash. "Sit down, everyone," I said. "Class is in session. And today's lesson is about what happens when you try to hustle a man who built the game." Before I tell you what happened next, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments if you think Miller deserves what is coming to him. Because the next 10 minutes, they were going to be the longest of his life. The front door didn't open. It exploded inward. The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot, sending shards of painted timber skittering across the hardwood floor. I didn't flinch. I sat in my leather armchair in the living room, a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand, waiting. I knew they were coming. Desperate people do not retreat. They attack. And Miller and Skylar were the most desperate people in the city right now. Their accounts were frozen. Their secrets were exposed. They had no money, no exit strategy, and no time. They had only one card left to play, and that was brute force. Officer Miller stepped through the ruin of my doorframe. He was wearing his full uniform, the badge on his chest gleaming under the hallway lights. But he didn't look like an officer of the law. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with red. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. His hand was resting on the grip of his service weapon, his knuckles white. Skylar was right behind him. She wasn't wearing her designer heels anymore. She was wearing sneakers and dark jeans, dressed for a felony. Her face was pale, her makeup smeared, her eyes darting around the room, as if she expected the FBI to jump out from behind the curtains. "Samuel Bennett," Miller barked, his voice cracking slightly. "I have a warrant for your arrest." I took a sip of coffee. "On what grounds, officer? Did I pay my taxes too early?" "Search the room," Miller ordered Skylar, ignoring me. Skylar rushed past me. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. She went straight to my bedroom on the ground floor. I heard her tearing the sheets off the bed. I heard drawers being ripped out and dumped onto the floor. It was a performance, a bad one. "I found it," she screamed from the bedroom 10 seconds later. She ran back into the living room, holding a clear plastic bag filled with white powder. It was a sandwich bag, the kind we kept in the kitchen drawer. It was filled with powdered sugar or baking soda, I imagined. It was crude. It was lazy. It was the work of amateurs who were running out of clock. "Look at this," Miller said, snatching the bag from her. "Cocaine, a lot of it. Intent to distribute. You are in big trouble, old man." I looked at the bag. I looked at Miller. "You brought that with you," I said calmly. "I saw the outline in your pocket when you walked in. If you were going to frame me, Miller, at least try to be creative. This is insulting to my intelligence." Miller crossed the room in 2 strides. He backhanded me. It wasn't a hard hit, just enough to knock the coffee cup from my hand. It shattered on the floor, staining the rug. "Stand up," he screamed. "You are under arrest." I stood up slowly. I held out my wrists. Miller grabbed them roughly, twisting my arms behind my back. I felt the cold steel of the handcuffs bite into my skin. He ratcheted them tight, tighter than regulation allowed, trying to hurt me, trying to make me feel powerless. "You are making a mistake," I said. "The only mistake I made was not killing you sooner," Miller hissed in my ear. He shoved me toward the door. Skylar followed, clutching the bag of fake drugs like it was a lifeline. We walked out into the cool night air. Miller's personal SUV, a black Chevrolet Tahoe with tinted windows, was parked in the driveway, its engine running. Not a patrol car. That was significant. If they took me in a patrol car, there would be a GPS log. There would be radio calls. This was off the books. This was a rendition. "Get in the back," Miller growled, opening the rear door and shoving me inside. I tumbled onto the leather seat, unable to break my fall with my hands cuffed behind me. I managed to sit up, adjusting my shoulders. Skylar got into the passenger seat. Miller jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door. As he put the car in gear, I glanced out the rear window. The garage door was open a crack. I saw a shadow move. It was low and fast. Harper. She had been waiting in the workshop just as I instructed. As Miller backed out of the driveway, I saw the trunk of the SUV pop open slightly. The latch didn't catch. Harper was inside. She had slipped in while they were busy manhandling me. My girl was a ghost. Miller drove fast, ignoring stop signs and speed limits. We weren't heading toward the precinct downtown. We were heading west, toward the industrial district. The city lights faded behind us, replaced by the skeletal silhouettes of old factories and warehouses. This was the part of town where the city forgot its history, rust and broken glass. "Where are we going, officer?" I asked. "This doesn't look like the way to booking." "Shut up," Skylar snapped from the front seat. She turned to look at me. Her face was a mask of hatred. "You ruined everything, Samuel. We had a plan. We were going to be happy. You just had to die quietly. Why couldn't you just die?" I didn't answer her. I looked at the back of Miller's head. I watched his eyes in the rearview mirror. He was terrified. He was a man who owed money to cartels or loan sharks, and I had just frozen his ability to pay. He wasn't taking me to jail. He was taking me to a place where he could beat the transfer codes out of me. The SUV turned down a gravel road, tires crunching on loose stone. We stopped in front of a massive corrugated metal structure. It used to be a textile mill 50 years ago. Now it was just a rot in the ground. Miller killed the engine. The silence of the abandoned district was heavy. "Out," Miller ordered, opening my door and dragging me out by my collar. He marched me toward the side door of the warehouse. Skylar followed, using her phone flashlight to light the way. Miller kicked the door open. The smell inside was ancient dust, machine oil, and rat droppings. He pushed me into the center of the vast, empty space. There was a single wooden chair sitting under a skylight that let in a beam of moonlight. "Sit," he commanded. I sat. Miller grabbed a roll of duct tape from his pocket. He taped my legs to the chair legs. He taped my chest to the backrest. He left my hands cuffed behind me. He walked around to face me. He took off his uniform cap and tossed it on the floor. He unbuttoned his collar. He looked like a man preparing for hard labor. "Here is how this works, Samuel," Miller said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "You are going to give us the passwords to the offshore accounts. You are going to sign a digital transfer authorizing the release of the funds, and you are going to do it right now. "And if I don't?" I asked. Miller pulled his service pistol from his holster. He didn't point it at me. He placed it on a rusted barrel next to him. "If you don't," Schuyler said, stepping out of the shadows, "we will leave you here. No one comes out here, Samuel. You will starve. Or maybe the rats will find you first. Or maybe James will start breaking fingers, one by one, until you type the code with your nose." I looked at them. They thought they had won. They thought I was a helpless old man tied to a chair in the middle of nowhere. They didn't know who I was. I shifted my weight in the chair. I could feel the handcuffs digging into my wrists. Smith & Wesson Model 100, double lock mechanism, nickel finish. Standard issue for law enforcement since the 90s. "You know, Miller," I said, my voice conversational, "I have a bit of history with this place. Not this warehouse specifically, but the industry." "Shut up," Miller said, pacing back and forth. "I don't want to hear your life story. I want the codes." "No, you should listen," I continued. 40 years ago, before I got into water filtration, I did some contracting work for the state. I was a junior engineer. They needed a new design for their restraint systems. The old ones were too heavy, too prone to jamming. They wanted something light, durable, and foolproof. Miller stopped pacing. He looked at me, confused by my calmness. "What are you babbling about?" "I designed the handcuffs you are wearing on your belt," I said, "and the ones you put on me. Model 100. I hold the patent for the ratcheting mechanism inside the casing. It was my first big paycheck." Schuyler laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "He is lying. He is trying to stall. He was a carpenter, James. He fixed porches." I ignored her. I kept my eyes on Miller. "It is a good design, solid steel, double locking pin to prevent shimming. But when we went to production, the state wanted to cut costs. They asked me to reduce the tolerance on the spring tension in the keyhole. I told them it would create a vulnerability. I told them that if you applied torque to the chain link at a 45-degree angle while creating lateral pressure on the housing, the pawl would slip." Miller stared at me. He looked at the gun on the barrel. He looked at my hands behind my back. "They didn't listen," I said. "They manufactured 50,000 units with that flaw before they fixed it in the next batch. Most of them are still in circulation, like these." I took a deep breath. I twisted my wrists. It wasn't about strength. It was about geometry. I torqued the chain link, applying the pressure exactly where I knew the weak point was. I felt the metal bite into my skin. I ignored the pain. I felt the spring tension inside the casing. I visualized the blueprint I had drawn on a drafting table in 1984. Click. The sound was small, sharp, and metallic. It echoed in the silence of the warehouse. The right cuff popped open. Miller's eyes went wide. He lunged for the gun. I didn't move my hands. I kept them behind my back, holding the loose cuff. I sat there, taped to the chair, looking at him. "You didn't fix the flaw, Miller," I said softly, "and now you have a problem." Miller grabbed the gun. He pointed it at my head. His hand was shaking. "How did you do that?" he screamed. "I told you," I said. "I built the system, and if you think the handcuffs are the only thing I control, you haven't been paying attention." Schuyler backed away, looking at the shadows of the warehouse. "What is that noise?" she whispered. There was a sound coming from the large metal bay doors at the far end of the warehouse, a rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat, or marching boots. Miller spun around, aiming the gun at the darkness. "Who is there?" I smiled. "The cavalry," I said. And then the bay doors exploded. Before I tell you what came through those doors, hit the like button. Let me know in the comments if you think intelligence is the most dangerous weapon a man can have. Because Officer Miller was about to find out that a gun is useless against a man who owns the battlefield. The dust from the breached bay doors hung in the air like a thick gray fog. Officer Miller did not drop his weapon. Instead, panic sharpened his reflexes into something jagged and dangerous. He grabbed the back of my neck with his free hand, digging his fingers into my skin, and jammed the barrel of his service pistol against my temple. The cold steel pressed hard against my skull, a physical promise of the end. He dragged me and the wooden chair I was taped to backward, retreating into the deeper shadows, away from the light of the breach. He was using me as a human shield. Schuyler was on the floor, scrambling on her hands and knees to stay behind us. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, animalistic hatred. She looked at me, and I saw no recognition of the woman who had shared Sunday dinners at my table. I saw only a cornered creature that would chew through its own leg to escape. She grabbed Miller's leg, pulling herself up. "Kill him, James!" she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain of her hysteria. "Just kill him. If he talks, we are dead anyway. Put a bullet in his head and let's go. We can take the back exit. Just do it." Miller was breathing hard, his chest heaving against my back. I could feel the tremors in his hand transmitted through the gun barrel. He was calculating the odds. He was realizing that a dead hostage might buy him less time than a live one. But Skylar's voice was a poison in his ear. She was the devil on his shoulder, urging him toward the abyss. "Sign the transfer," Miller roared, pressing the gun harder until I felt a bruise forming. "Give me the verbal authorization code for the bank. Do it now, Samuel, or I swear to God I will paint this warehouse with your brains. You have 5 seconds. I looked straight ahead. The warehouse was vast and empty, filled with the skeletons of old machinery. But high up in the rafters, almost invisible against the gloom of the ceiling, a tiny red light blinked rhythmically. It was a motion-activated security camera, a remnant of the old alarm system that had been upgraded when the district was rezoned for private security. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. Most people wouldn't have cared. But I knew the specs, I knew the installation date, and I knew who was watching the feed. I didn't struggle. I didn't beg. I sat up as straight as the duct tape allowed. I looked directly into the lens of that camera, ignoring the gun at my head and the woman screaming for my death. "Omega Red!" I shouted. My voice was clear, authoritative, cutting through the panic in the room like a hammer striking an anvil. "Omega Red! Authorization Bennett Alpha 1. Miller froze. He jerked the gun slightly, but he didn't fire. Confusion warred with adrenaline in his eyes. "What are you saying?" he hissed. "Is that the code? Is that the bank code?" Skylar stopped screaming. She looked at me, then followed my gaze to the camera in the rafters. "What is he doing, James?" she whispered. "Why is he talking to the ceiling?" Before I could answer, a sound cut through the tension. It wasn't a siren. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a ringtone. A standard, generic marimba ringtone coming from Miller's pocket. It was loud. In the silence of the standoff, it sounded like a bomb going off. Miller flinched. He looked down at his pocket. He tried to ignore it, but the phone kept ringing, insistent, demanding. It wasn't his burner phone. It wasn't the phone he used to call Skylar. It was his official department-issued device. "Answer it," I said softly. "I think it is for you." Miller looked at me with wild eyes. He kept the gun trained on my head with one hand and reached into his pocket with the other. He pulled out the phone. He looked at the screen. His face went slack. The blood drained out of him so fast he looked like a corpse standing upright. "It is the chief," he whispered. "Put it on speaker," I commanded. Miller's thumb hovered over the screen. He was a man watching his own executioner sharpen the axe. He tapped the button. "Officer James Miller," a voice boomed from the tiny speaker. It was Chief Henderson. The voice was cold, official, and devoid of any brotherhood. "This is Chief Henderson. Listen to me very carefully. You are hereby stripped of your badge and your authority. Your service weapon is now considered an illegal firearm. You are surrounded by federal agents and private security contractors." Miller started to shake. "Chief," he stammered. "Chief, listen, I am undercover. I am conducting a sting operation. This man is a drug lord. I found cocaine." "Save it, Miller," the chief interrupted. "We have been watching your body camera feed for the last 20 minutes. We have the audio. We have the video of you threatening a civilian. We have the financial records provided by Mr. Bennett's legal team. It is over. Put the weapon down and walk out with your hands up, or my snipers will drop you where you stand. You have 10 seconds. Miller dropped the phone. It hit the concrete with a crack. He looked at the gun in his hand. He looked at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just been caught. He had been outplayed from the very beginning. I flexed my arms. The duct tape holding my chest to the chair strained. With a sharp exhale, I snapped my wrists outward. The tape, already weakened by the subtle friction I had been applying for the last 10 minutes, tore. I ripped my legs free. I stood up. Miller took a step back, raising the gun again. "Stay back," he yelled, but his voice was thin. "Stay back." I brushed the dust off my shirt. I looked him in the eye. You can't shoot me, James. Not because you have a conscience, but because you are a coward. And because you know that if you pull that trigger, the 20 men outside this building will turn you into Swiss cheese before my body hits the floor. How? Skylar whispered. She was trembling, backing away toward the shadows. How did you do this? You are a carpenter. You fix porches. I turned to her. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I am a carpenter, Skylar. But before that, I was an engineer. And 3 months ago, when I realized someone was accessing my accounts, I didn't just change my passwords. I bought the bank. Her eyes went wide. Well, not the bank, I corrected myself. I bought the security firm that patrols this industrial district, Ironclad Security. I acquired a controlling interest through a shell company. I knew Tyrell was meeting people out here. I knew this was your drop spot. I have had this building wired for sound and video for 6 weeks. I have been working with the FBI Financial Crimes Division since the day you forged my signature on that loan application. I took a step toward them. Miller lowered the gun. His arm was sagging. Omega Red, I explained, pointing to the camera, is the override code for the facility's lockdown protocol. It also patches the live feed directly to the chief of police's personal line. I wanted him to see you. I wanted him to see the man he trusted holding a gun to a pensioner's head. Miller looked at the gun. He looked at the doors. He looked at Skylar. He made a calculation. He was a survivor. He knew that kidnapping was bad, but murdering a federal informant was a death sentence. I am sorry, he muttered. He didn't say it to me. He said it to Skylar. Then he turned and ran. He bolted toward the rear exit, the metal fire door that led to the alleyway. He moved fast, fueled by the adrenaline of a man who knows his life is over. He hit the push bar and burst out into the night, leaving his accomplice behind. "James," Skylar screamed. "James, wait! Don't leave me!" She tried to run after him. She scrambled over the debris, reaching for the closing door, but she wasn't fast enough. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a clang that echoed through the warehouse like a judgment bell. She threw herself against it, pounding on the metal. "James! James, come back! You can't leave me here with him." She pulled at the handle. Locked. Miller had jammed it from the outside, or it was a one-way security door. It didn't matter. He was gone. He had abandoned her to save himself, just as he would have abandoned her once the money ran out. Skylar slumped against the door. She slid down to the cold concrete floor. She was sobbing, great heaving gasps of air that sounded like a drowning animal. She was alone. Her lover was gone. Her husband was broken, and the man she had tried to kill was standing 10 feet away, watching her with eyes that had seen too much. I walked over to the barrel where Miller had left his hat. I picked it up and dusted it off. I placed it on the chair I had been tied to. I walked towards Skylar. She looked up at me. Her makeup was ruined, streaking down her face in black tears. Her expensive clothes were covered in dust and grime. She looked small. She looked pathetic. "Please, Samuel," she whispered. "Please. I didn't mean it. He forced me. James forced me. I was scared." I stopped. I looked down at her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound, heavy sadness. This was the woman my son had chosen. This was the mother of the child she claimed to be carrying. "Get up, Skylar," I said. She shook her head. "No. No, you are going to hurt me." "I am not going to hurt you," I said. "I don't hit women, even women who try to poison me. But you need to get up. Because the police are coming through the front door in about 30 seconds. And before they put you in handcuffs, there is one last thing we need to discuss." "What?" she sniffled. "The money," I said. "The $300,000 you took from my home equity. Miller didn't take the bag. He left it on the counter in the apartment. But you transferred something else. You moved $50,000 to a Cayman account yesterday. Where is the access key?" She looked away. "I don't know what you were talking about." "Don't lie to me, Skylar," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Not now. Not when you are sitting in the ashes of your life. Tell me where the key is, or I will make sure the district attorney adds federal embezzlement to your charge sheet. Do you want to go to prison for 10 years or 20? She reached into her bra. She pulled out a small silver USB drive. Her hand was shaking so hard she dropped it. It clattered on the floor between us. "It is all there," she whispered. "The codes, the ledgers, just tell them I cooperated. Please, Samuel, tell them I helped you. I picked up the drive. I put it in my pocket. I will tell them the truth, Skylar," I said. "I will tell them exactly what you did." The front bay doors opened again. This time, beams of white tactical light cut through the darkness. Men in body armor poured into the room. FBI, police, and behind them, a man in a sharp suit walking calmly through the chaos. Franklin Moss. He saw me. He nodded. I looked at Skylar one last time. "Your ride is here," I said. Before I tell you what happened when I made Skylar look at the ultrasound report, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments if you think betrayal is worse than theft, because what I was about to reveal to her, that was going to hurt more than any prison sentence. The silence in the warehouse was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant wail of sirens that were not coming to save Skylar, but to collect her. The federal agents and police officers who had stormed the building had stepped back into the shadows, forming a perimeter of silent judgment. They were giving me a moment. It was a professional courtesy, orchestrated by Franklin Moss, who stood by the metal doors, checking his watch. He gave me a nod. I had 5 minutes before the handcuffs went on. Skylar was on her knees on the cold concrete floor. The dust and grime of the abandoned factory had ruined her expensive jeans and smeared her face with gray streaks. She looked up at me, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw the mask slip completely. There was no arrogance left. There was no calculation. There was only the raw, animal panic of a creature that realizes the trap has snapped shut. "Samuel, please," she sobbed, crawling forward until she was at the hem of my work boots. She reached out to grab my leg, but stopped, her hands hovering in the air, trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You have to believe me. It was James. It was Miller. He is a monster. He threatened me. He said he would hurt Tyrell if I didn't help him get the money. I was just trying to protect my husband. I was trying to protect your son." I looked down at her. Her performance was impressive. If I hadn't heard the recordings of her laughing about my death, if I hadn't seen her counting my money in that penthouse, I might have hesitated. But I knew better. "Stand up, Skylar," I said, my voice flat. "Stop embarrassing yourself. Miller ran away. He left you here. That should tell you everything you need to know about who was forcing whom." She shook her head violently, tears flying from her eyes. No, you don't understand. I was scared. I did it for the family, and I did it for the baby." I froze. "The baby." "Yes," she cried, seizing on my hesitation. "I am pregnant, Samuel. I am 12 weeks along. I didn't tell Tyrell yet because I wanted it to be a surprise when we were financially stable. But it is true. You are going to be a grandfather. Please, Samuel, you can't send the mother of your grandchild to prison. Think about the baby. An innocent life, your blood." She placed her hands on her stomach, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. It was her trump card, the ultimate manipulation. She knew that despite everything, I was a man who valued legacy. She knew I had wanted grandchildren for years. She thought this would break me. She thought this would make me call off the dogs. I looked at Franklin Moss. He walked over calmly and handed me a small remote control. I pointed it at the wall of the warehouse, where a large white sheet of plastic hung, remnants of some old industrial process. "You are right, Skylar," I said softly. "A baby changes things. A grandchild is a blessing." Hope flared in her eyes. She smiled, a watery, trembling smile. Yes, it is. We can start over, for the baby." I pressed the button on the remote. A portable projector sitting on a crate hummed to life, casting a bright rectangular image onto the plastic sheet. It wasn't a movie, it was a video file. The quality was grainy, taken in an interrogation room just hours ago. On the screen was Tyrell. My son looked broken. He was sitting at a metal table holding a cup of water, his eyes red and swollen. A detective was sitting across from him. Skylar turned her head to look at the projection. Her smile faltered. "Turn up the volume," I said. The audio crackled through the warehouse speakers. "Detective, ask him the question again." The detective on the screen leaned forward. "Tyrell, I need you to be clear. Why are you so certain that you have no future with your wife?" Tyrell, on the screen, let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked directly into the camera lens. "Because she doesn't love me," he said, his voice cracking. "She never loved me. She married me for my dad's money, and she made sure we would never be a real family."
"What do you mean?" the detective asked.
2 years ago, Terrell continued, wiping his nose. "Skylar told me she didn't want kids, not with me. She said I was genetically irresponsible. She said she didn't want to pass on my failures. She made me get a vasectomy." Skylar, on the floor, let out a gasp. She tried to scramble up to cover the projection, but her legs wouldn't work. "She drove me to the clinic," Terrell said on the video. "She paid for it out of the joint account. She waited in the lobby to make sure I went through with it. I have the medical records. I have the receipt. I am sterile. I have been sterile for 24 months. I pressed the button, and the video froze on Tyrell's devastated face. I looked down at Skylar. The hope in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, hollow terror. She knew she had been caught in the ultimate lie. "So Skylar," I said, my voice echoing in the silent warehouse, "if my son has been unable to father children for 2 years, explain to me how you are carrying my grandchild." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an excuse, but there were none. "It is a miracle, isn't it?" I asked, stepping closer. "A medical marvel. Or perhaps there is a simpler explanation. Perhaps the baby belongs to the man you were celebrating with an hour ago, the man who abandoned you, the man who helped you steal my money." "Miller," she whispered. It wasn't a denial, it was a realization. "That is right," I said. "That baby isn't a Bennett. That baby is the child of a corrupt cop and a thief. And while I pity that child for the parents it has, I will not let you use it as a shield. You aren't carrying my legacy, Skylar. You are carrying evidence of your infidelity." She collapsed forward, her forehead resting on the dirty floor. She began to sob again, but this time, it wasn't a performance. It was the sound of total defeat. "I am sorry," she wailed. "I am so sorry. I don't want your apologies," I said, reaching into the folder Franklin had handed me. "I want my money." I pulled out a document. It was a thick sheaf of papers stapled at the top. I threw it down in front of her. It landed with a heavy slap on the concrete. "What is this?" she asked, lifting her head. "That," I said, "is a civil demand letter combined with a confession of judgment. You see, Skylar, while you were busy playing house with Miller, you made a mistake. You forged my signature on a home equity line of credit. You took $300,000 of equity out of the house I paid for." "I spent it," she whispered. "It is gone." "I know you spent some of it," I said. "I saw the cash in the apartment. The feds have seized that. But you owe me the full amount plus interest, plus legal fees, plus damages for emotional distress. The total comes to $450,000. "I don't have that kind of money," she screamed. "You know I don't." "You froze my accounts." "Then you have a choice," I said, kneeling down, so I was eye level with her. "You can sign this document admitting to the fraud and agreeing to full restitution, which will likely mean wage garnishment for the rest of your life. Or you can refuse, and I will hand over the evidence of the mortgage fraud to the district attorney right now. That is a federal crime, Skylar. Bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft. That is 20 years in federal prison, and unlike state prison, federal prison doesn't have parole. You will have that baby behind bars, and they will take it away from you before you even get to hold it." She stared at me, her eyes wide with horror. "You would do that. You would send a pregnant woman to prison. You tried to poison me, Skylar," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "You tried to make my son think he was insane. You tried to kill a young woman to cover your tracks. Do not talk to me about morality. Sign the paper or go to jail." She looked at the paper. She looked at the pen I had thrown down next to it. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely pick it up. "I can't pay it," she sobbed. "I have nothing. My parents cut me off years ago." "Ah, yes," I said, standing up. "The Sterlings, Richard and Victoria, the people who treated me like a servant in my own home." Skylar looked up, hope flickering in her eyes again. "My dad," she said. "My dad has money. He will help me. He won't let me go to prison. He cares about the family name." "Call him," I said. "What?" she asked, confused. "Call him," I repeated, pointing to her phone which was lying on the floor where she had dropped it. "Call your father. Tell him you need $500,000 by sunrise, or his daughter goes to federal prison. Let us see how much the Sterling name is really worth." She grabbed the phone. Her fingers fumbled with the screen. She dialed. She put it on speaker because I gestured for her to do so. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times.
Hello, Richard Sterling's voice boomed from the speaker.
He sounded angry. Who is this? It is 3 in the morning. Daddy, it is Skylar, she cried. Daddy, you have to help me. I am in trouble, big trouble. Skylar, Richard snapped. I told you not to call me unless it was important. I am dealing with a crisis here. My company accounts have been frozen. Some lunatic lawyer is claiming he bought my debt. What do you want? Daddy, I need money, she sobbed. I need $450,000. Or, Samuel is going to send me to jail. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Richard laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Samuel, he asked, the carpenter, the old man who spilled wine on your mother? Yes, Daddy. He is not a carpenter. He is rich. He owns everything, and he has me cornered. Please, Daddy, I am pregnant. Pregnant, Richard repeated. Well, congratulations, but I don't have $500,000, Skylar. I don't have $10 right now. My assets are locked.
And even if they weren't, I wouldn't give them to you to pay off a man who cleans gutters. You made this mess, you fix it.
Daddy, wait, she screamed. Fix it, Skylar, Richard shouted. And tell your husband to get a job. The line went dead. Skylar stared at the phone. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Her last lifeline had just been cut. Her parents didn't care. They were too busy trying to save their own sinking ship, a ship that I had torpedoed 12 hours ago. She looked up at me. She looked at the document. She realized she was alone, truly alone. She picked up the pen. She signed the document. Her signature was shaky, a jagged scrawl of defeat. I picked up the papers. I handed them to Franklin Moss. File it, I said. Franklin nodded and put the folder in his briefcase. I looked at Skylar one last time. You are not going to prison today, I said, but you are going to leave this city. You are going to go somewhere far away where nobody knows the name Bennett or Sterling. And every month for the rest of your life, you are going to send me a check. And every time you write that check, you are going to remember the night you underestimated a carpenter. I turned my back on her. Get her out of here, I told the agents. They moved in, lifting her by the arms. She didn't fight. She hung limp like a rag doll, weeping softly. I walked toward the exit of the warehouse. The sun was starting to come up outside, turning the sky a bruised purple. I was tired. My bones ached. But I wasn't done. There was one more person I had to deal with. The Sterlings were coming. They wouldn't take the foreclosure lying down. They would come with lawyers and threats. Franklin walked beside me. They are on their way, Samuel, he said, checking his phone. Richard Sterling just booked a flight. He is coming here to confront you personally. He thinks he can intimidate you into releasing the debt.
Good, I said, stepping out into the cool morning air.
Let him come. I have a presentation prepared for him. Before I tell you what happened when the Sterlings arrived at the warehouse, hit subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you think Skylar got off too easy. Because what I had planned for her parents, that was going to be a public execution of their entire legacy. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when the roar of engines cut through the morning silence. It wasn't the police. It was a convoy of 3 black SUVs, gleaming and pristine, looking entirely out of place against the backdrop of the rusted industrial district. They screeched to a halt in front of the warehouse bay doors, kicking up a cloud of dust that coated their polished rims. Doors flew open before the vehicles had even fully stopped. Richard Sterling stepped out first. He looked like a man who was used to kicking down doors, but today he looked unhinged. His tie was loose, his face was a mottled purple of rage, and he was marching toward me with the intent to kill. Behind him came Victoria, clutching a Chanel bag like a shield, her face twisted in a sneer of absolute disgust. And flanking them was a man in a pinstripe suit carrying a briefcase, the kind of lawyer who charges by the breath. I stood in the center of the warehouse floor, a paper cup of coffee in my hand. Skylar was gone, taken away by the agents minutes ago. The space was empty now, except for me, Franklin, and the echo of justice being served. "Where is she?" Richard bellowed, his voice bouncing off the metal walls. "Where is my daughter?" He stopped 10 feet from me, breathing hard. He looked at me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. He didn't see a threat. He saw a nuisance. He saw a black man in work boots standing in a dirty warehouse, and his prejudice filled in the rest of the picture. "You," Richard spat, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "You are going to regret the day you were born. You think you can kidnap a Sterling? You think you can extort us?" He turned to his lawyer. "Bradford, tell him. Tell this janitor what happens when he touches my family." The lawyer stepped forward. He smoothed his tie, looking at the surroundings with a wrinkled nose. "Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice oily and smooth, "I am representing the Sterling family. We are filing immediate federal charges for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and extortion. We will also be filing a civil suit for emotional distress damages in the amount of $50 million. If you do not produce Skylar Sterling immediately, I will have the local sheriff here to drag you out in chains." Victoria chimed in, her voice shrill. "Look at him, Richard. He is filthy. He probably hurt her. These people are all the same. Violent, greedy. They see a little bit of money, and they think they can take what belongs to their betters." I took a sip of coffee. I let the silence stretch. I let them feel their own power, let them inflate themselves with their indignation. I wanted them at their peak before I pulled the rug out. "My daughter-in-law is currently in federal custody," I said calmly. "She confessed to mortgage fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. She signed a confession. She is on her way to a holding cell. If you want to see her, I suggest you check the visitation hours at the county jail." "Liar!" Victoria shrieked. "Skylar would never do that. You forced her. You probably beat her. We are going to destroy you," Richard growled, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "I am going to bury you under so many lawsuits your grandchildren will be born in debt. I am going to take your house, your truck, and the shirt off your back. You are a nobody, Bennett, a poor black carpenter who played a game he doesn't understand. I build skyscrapers. I own this city, and I am going to crush you like a bug." He was enjoying it. He was savoring the threat. He thought he was the hammer, and I was the nail. I looked at Franklin Moss, who had been standing quietly in the shadows near a stack of pallets. Franklin stepped into the light. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Richard Sterling with the expression of an undertaker, measuring a corpse for a coffin. "Good morning, Richard," Franklin said pleasantly. Richard froze. He squinted. Franklin Moss, what are you doing here? Are you representing this criminal?" "I am representing Mr. Bennett, yes," Franklin said, walking over to join me. "But I am not here to discuss criminal charges. I am here to discuss corporate governance." Richard laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Corporate governance? What are you talking about? I fired you 5 years ago, Franklin. You are a has-been." Franklin didn't blink. He opened his briefcase. He pulled out a single document, bound in blue legal backing. He handed it to Richard. "This is a summons," Franklin said, "from the Board of Directors of Sterling Construction." Richard swatted the paper away. It fluttered to the dirty floor. "I am the Board of Directors, you idiot. I own 60% of the voting stock. I am the chairman, the CEO, and the majority shareholder. You can't summon me." "Actually," I said, speaking up for the first time since they started their tirade, "that is factually incorrect." Richard turned on me, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Shut up. Do not speak to me," I continued, my voice steady and hard. 3 years ago, when your company was over-leveraged on the waterfront project, you issued a new round of Class B preferred stock to raise capital. You sold it through a blind trust to avoid spooking the market. You thought you were selling to a consortium of foreign investors. Richard went still. The color began to drain from his face. "How do you know that? That is confidential financial information." "I know," I said, "because I bought it." Victoria laughed. You bought it. With what? Your pension check. Did you save up your tips from fixing toilets? I ignored her. "I bought the initial offering," I said, "and then, over the last 18 months, as your stock price dipped due to those structural steel rumors you were so worried about, I kept buying. I bought the debt you defaulted on last week. I bought the outstanding loans from your primary lender this morning. And most importantly, I bought the voting rights from your silent partners who were panic selling when the market opened today." I signaled Franklin. He pulled out another document. He held it up. It was a shareholder register, updated as of 8 a.m. this morning. "Samuel Bennett, trustee," Franklin read aloud. "Total voting share ownership, 51%. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. Even the dust motes seemed to stop moving. Richard Sterling stared at me. His brain was trying to process the impossible. The man standing in front of him, the man he had insulted, racialized, and threatened, owned him. That is impossible, Richard whispered. 51%. That is hundreds of millions of dollars. You are a carpenter. I was an engineer, Richard, I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble. I hold 30 patents in hydraulic fluid dynamics. Every time you flush a toilet in a high-rise in this city, every time a water treatment plant cycles its filters, I get paid. I have been getting paid for 40 years. I didn't live in a mansion because I didn't need to prove I was rich. I invested. I compounded. And when you threatened my family, I liquidated. I took a step forward. Richard took a step back. He looked small now. The bluster was gone. And as the majority shareholder, I continued, enjoying the look of terror in his eyes, I have some bad news. The board has met. We have reviewed the financials. We have found significant irregularities, embezzlement, kickbacks from steel suppliers, personal expenses charged to the company accounts. I pointed to the document on the floor. That is your termination notice, Richard. You are fired, effective immediately. Your access to the company accounts is revoked. Your company credit cards are canceled. Security is currently escorting your staff out of the building to preserve evidence. Victoria grabbed Richard's arm. Richard, tell him he is lying. Tell him this is a joke. We have the gala next week. We have the house in the Hamptons. The house in the Hamptons is company property, Franklin interjected smoothly. It has been seized, as has the penthouse, the cars, and the yacht. We are freezing all assets pending a forensic audit. If, as we suspect, you have been using company funds to support your lifestyle, you will be facing criminal charges for corporate theft. Richard started to sway. He grabbed his chest. My heart, he gasped. You don't have a heart, Richard, I said coldly. You have a wallet where your heart should be, and I just emptied it. Bradford, the expensive lawyer, looked at the documents Franklin was holding. He looked at Richard, who was turning gray. He looked at me. He closed his briefcase. Mr. Sterling, Bradford said, backing away, I cannot represent you in a conflict of interest involving the majority shareholder. I am going to have to recuse myself, and I will need a retainer check for my time today. Oh, wait. Your checks won't clear. The lawyer turned and walked out. He didn't run. He walked with the brisk efficiency of a rat leaving a sinking ship. Richard Sterling looked at me one last time. His eyes were pleading. Samuel, please. We can work this out. We are family. Skylar is your daughter-in-law. Skylar is in jail, I said. And you are trespassing on my property. Get out. Richard opened his mouth to beg, but his legs gave way. He collapsed to the concrete floor, clutching his chest. Victoria screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Richard, breathe. Help us. Somebody help us. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Please, Samuel, call an ambulance. He is dying. I looked down at them, the king and queen of the city, reduced to begging in the dirt. I took my phone out of my pocket. I dialed 911. This is Samuel Bennett, I told the operator. I am at the old textile mill on Industrial Way. I have a trespasser who appears to be having a medical emergency. Yes, send an ambulance. I hung up. I didn't offer CPR. I didn't offer a hand. I turned to Franklin. Make sure the audit is thorough, I said. I want to know where every penny went. I walked toward the bay doors, leaving the Sterlings to the mercy of the system they had tried to weaponize against me. The sun was fully up now. The light was harsh and revealing. The empire of Sterling construction had fallen in 10 minutes, dismantled by a man they thought was beneath them. I got into my truck. Harper was sitting in the passenger seat, watching me with awe. Is it done? She asked. It is done, I said. They are finished. But there was one loose end left, one piece of the puzzle that still needed to be put in its place. Tyrell, my son. He was still at the house, or maybe running. I had to go back. I had to close the door on the past so I could start the future. We drove back to the suburbs in silence. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, aching fatigue. I wasn't a young man. I was tired of fighting. But I knew the final confrontation would be the hardest. Facing your enemies is easy. Facing your own blood is a tragedy. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as we had left it, but it felt different. It felt like a tomb. I walked up the path, Harper beside me. The front door was still unlocked. I pushed it open. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Tyrell, I called out. No answer. I walked into the living room. It was empty. I walked into the kitchen. Empty. Then I heard a sound coming from my study. The sound of metal hitting metal. A frantic, desperate clanging. I walked to the study door. Tyrell was there. He was on his knees in front of my wall safe. He had a crowbar in his hands. He was smashing it against the steel door, screaming in frustration. He was trying to break into the safe that held the cash he thought was his salvation. He was trying to rob me one last time. He didn't hear me come in. He was too lost in his madness. "Tyrell," I said softly. He spun around. He was sweating, his eyes wild. He raised the crowbar. He looked at me, and I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger, a dangerous stranger. "Give me the combination," he screamed, raising the weapon. "Give it to me or I swear I will finish what Skylar started." I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. "You can't finish anything, son," I said, "because you never started anything. You just followed orders." He lunged. Before I tell you how that ended, hit subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you think a parent can ever truly give up on a child. Because what happened next, that was the moment I stopped being a father and became a survivor. Tyrell did not scream when he lunged. He made a sound that was less human and more like a machine grinding its gears until they snapped. He dropped the crowbar, which clattered uselessly against the hardwood floor, and grabbed the aluminum baseball bat leaning against the wall. It was his old Little League bat. I remembered buying it for him when he was 10 years old. I remembered teaching him how to hold it, how to keep his eye on the ball, how to swing through the strike zone. Now he was gripping it with white knuckles, his eyes fixed on my skull, intending to strike me out of existence. He swung the bat with a desperate, clumsy violence. The aluminum whistled through the air. I did not move. I did not raise my hands to protect my face. I did not flinch. I stood my ground because I knew something Tyrell did not. I knew the person standing just to my right was not a scared girl named Harper. She was not a grifter. She was not a random actress I had picked up at the police station. Harper moved with a speed that blurred the edges of my vision. She did not panic. She did not scramble. She stepped into the arc of the swing, her movement precise and fluid like a hydraulic piston firing. She raised her left forearm, blocking the bat near Tyrell's hands where the force was weakest, absorbing the impact with a grunt of effort. In the same motion, she drove her right boot into Tyrell's kneecap. There was a sickening crunch. It was the sound of bone giving way under superior force. Tyrell screamed, a high-pitched wail of agony that shattered the silence of the house. His leg buckled backward at an unnatural angle. He collapsed to the floor, dropping the bat. But Harper was not done. She spun behind him, driving her knee into his spine and pinning him to the Persian rug. She grabbed his right arm, twisting it behind his back until I heard the shoulder joint pop. "Stay down," she commanded. Her voice was not the terrified whisper of the girl in the interrogation room. It was the bark of a drill sergeant. It was the voice of authority. Tyrell writhed on the floor, sobbing into the carpet. "My leg," he cried. "You broke my leg. You are crazy. Dad, help me. She is crazy." I walked over to where the bat had fallen. I picked it up. It felt light in my hand. I looked at the dents in the metal, scars from games played 20 years ago. I leaned it carefully against the desk. "She is not crazy, Tyrell," I said, looking down at him. "She is a professional." I nodded to Harper. She eased the pressure on his arm but kept her knee firmly planted on his back. She looked up at me, her face calm, her breathing even. She wasn't even sweating. "Allow me to introduce you properly," I said to my weeping son. "This is not Harper. This is Sergeant Evelyn Cross, formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment. She served 2 tours in Afghanistan. She was a close-quarters combat instructor." Tyrell gasped, trying to look back at the woman who was holding him down. "What?" he wheezed. "She was dishonorably discharged 6 months ago," I continued, my voice steady. "She was framed for a theft she didn't commit because she refused to testify against her commanding officer, who was skimming off the top. She lost her pension. She lost her reputation. She was living in her car when I found her." I walked around the desk and sat in my chair. I looked at the safe Tyrell had been trying to break into. The keypad was smashed, but the door was solid steel. It had held. "I needed someone, Tyrell. I needed someone who knew what it was like to be betrayed by the people who were supposed to lead. I needed someone who had skills that money usually can't buy. I hired her 3 months ago, not to play my daughter, but to be my shadow, to watch you, to watch Skylar, to make sure that when you inevitably tried to kill me, I would survive. Tyrell stopped struggling. The realization washed over him. The girl at the police station, the bruises. It was all a setup. You set me up, he whispered, his face pressed into the rug. You planned this. I didn't plan for you to try to murder me, I corrected him. I planned for the worst-case scenario. You created the scenario. You and your wife decided that I was worth more dead than alive. You decided to cut the brakes on a car you thought an innocent girl was driving. You decided to poison a bowl of soup. All I did was hold up a mirror, son. You are the one who looked into it and saw a monster. I signaled Harper. She stood up, stepping back but keeping her eyes locked on him. Tyrell rolled over, clutching his shattered knee. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot and the sweat. He looked small. He looked like the child who used to come crying to me when he scraped his elbow. But that child was gone. Dad, please, he sobbed. I am sorry. I was desperate. Skylar made me do it. She said we would lose everything. I am your son. You can't let them take me. Please, Dad. I am your only son. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had let his wife call me racial slurs in my own kitchen. I looked at the man who had forged my signature. I looked at the man who had stood by while his in-laws treated me like a servant. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. The room was quiet except for his jagged breathing. Do you remember last Christmas, Tyrell? I asked softly. He blinked, confused by the question. What? Last Christmas, I repeated. You and Skylar hosted a party. You invited her parents. You invited your friends. You told me there wasn't enough room at the main table. You told me it would be better if I ate downstairs in the finished basement so I could watch my shows. Tyrell flinched. Dad, that was Skylar. She said you would be more comfortable. You put my dinner on a paper plate, I said. You gave me plastic cutlery. And when I went downstairs, I heard you locking the door at the top of the stairs. You locked me in the basement of the house I paid for, so you wouldn't be embarrassed by your black father in front of your white friends. I didn't, he stammered. The lock was sticky. I didn't mean to. I heard you laughing, Tyrell. I heard you tell Skylar's father that I was getting confused, that I preferred the dark, that I was better off out of sight. I stood up. The anger I had been holding back for months, the cold, hard rage that had fueled this entire operation, finally rose to the surface. It didn't explode. It solidified. It turned into a wall of ice between me and the man on the floor. I sat in that basement for 4 hours, I said. I listened to you celebrate. And in that dark room, I realized something. I realized I didn't have a son anymore. My son died a long time ago. The boy I raised would never have treated a dog the way you treated me. The boy I raised had a spine. The boy I raised knew right from wrong. Tyrell reached out a hand toward me. Dad, no. I can change. I can fix this. You are not my son, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. You are a stranger who broke into my house. You are a thief who tried to kill an old man for his insurance money. My son is dead. You killed him the day you let your wife convince you that I was nothing more than a wallet with a pulse. I picked up my phone. I dialed 911. Tyrell screamed, No! Put it down! 911, what is your emergency? The operator asked. My name is Samuel Bennett, I said, keeping my eyes on Tyrell. I am at 42 Oak Street. There is an intruder in my home. He is armed and dangerous. He has assaulted a woman. We have subdued him, but he requires medical attention and police transport. Dad, don't do this, Tyrell wailed, trying to drag himself toward me. I am your flesh and blood. I hung up the phone. I looked at Harper. Watch him, I said. If he moves, break the other leg. I walked out of the study. I walked into the kitchen. I poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. I washed the cup. I dried it. I put it away in the cupboard. I could hear sirens in the distance, getting louder. They were coming for him. They were coming to take away the last remnant of the life I used to have. I walked to the front door and opened it. The morning air was cool. The sun was fully up now, shining on the manicured lawn that Skylar had hated so much. The blue lights of the police cruisers reflected off the white siding of the house. Officers rushed up the driveway, guns drawn. "He is in the study," I told them, pointing inside. "He is injured." I watched them run past me. I watched them drag Tyrell out on a stretcher 5 minutes later. He was handcuffed to the rails. He was screaming my name. He was begging me to look at him. I didn't look. I turned my back on him. I looked at the oak tree in the front yard. I had planted it the day he was born. It was tall now, strong, its roots deep in the earth. It had grown straight and true, unlike him. Harper walked out of the house. She stood beside me. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, a silent sentinel. "Is it over?" she asked, after the ambulance drove away. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. "Yes," I said, "it is over." But the story wasn't quite done. There was one more thing to do. There was a future to build, and I had just the partner to build it with. Before I tell you the final chapter of my life, hit subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you believe that blood is thicker than water, or if loyalty is the only thing that matters. Because what I did next shocked everyone, even my lawyer. The wheels of justice turn slowly for the poor, but for a man with the resources to buy the road, they can move with terrifying speed. The trials took 6 months. I attended every single one. I sat in the back row wearing my best suit, watching the people who had tried to dismantle my life get dismantled by the state. Franklin Moss was a surgeon in the courtroom. He dissected their lies with a precision that was almost beautiful to watch. Tyrell was the first to fall. My son stood before the judge, trembling in his orange jumpsuit. His lawyer tried to argue coercion. He tried to paint Tyrell as a victim of a manipulative wife. But the video of him holding a knife to Harper's throat was undeniable. The audio of him agreeing to gaslight me was damning. The judge looked at him not with pity, but with disgust. 15 years. That was the sentence. 15 years for attempted murder, fraud, and assault. Tyrell wept when the gavel came down. He looked back at me, searching for a father who would save him. He found only a witness. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just watched him being led away, knowing that the boy I raised had died long ago, and the man leaving the room was a stranger I had finally evicted from my heart. Skylar was next. She fought harder. She screamed. She accused. She tried to blame Miller. She tried to blame Tyrell. She even tried to blame me, claiming I had entrapped her. But the forensic audit was a fortress she couldn't breach. The jury saw the transfers. They saw the fake medical records. They saw the depths of her greed. 12 years in federal prison. She didn't cry. She just stared at me with a cold, dead hatred. She knew she had lost everything, her freedom, her reputation, and the imaginary inheritance she had killed for. Miller got the worst of it. The system does not like dirty cops. They are a stain on the badge. His trial was swift and brutal. The evidence from his own body camera and the financial records I provided sealed his fate. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. When they read the verdict, he looked small. He looked like a bully who had finally met a bigger fist. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, knowing he would die in a cage. And then there were the Sterlings, Richard and Victoria. They didn't even make it to a criminal trial for the kidnapping attempt. The IRS got them first. The audit I triggered revealed decades of tax evasion, money laundering, and corporate theft. They lost the company. They lost the penthouses. They lost the yachts. They declared bankruptcy 3 months ago, but it didn't save them. Richard was sentenced to 8 years for tax fraud. Victoria got 5. They went from the top of the social ladder to the bottom of a prison cell in less than a year. Their legacy was dust. When the last trial ended, I walked out of the courthouse. The air felt cleaner. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for a decade was gone. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't lonely. I had cut out the rot, and now it was time to plant something new. I drove straight to Franklin's office. Harper was waiting there. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back. She looked different. The bruises were long gone. The fear was gone. She looked strong. She looked like herself. I sat down across from her. Franklin placed a stack of documents on the table. "These are the adoption papers," I said. Harper looked at them. She looked at me. "You don't have to do this, Samuel. I am a grown woman. I was just doing a job." "You were never just doing a job," I said. "You saved my life. You stood by me when my own blood tried to bleed me dry. You are the daughter I never had, Harper, and I want to make it official." She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled slightly, just for a second. Then she signed, Evelyn Harper Bennett. I smiled. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out another document. And this, I said, sliding it toward her, is the deed to the Bennett Foundation. She read the title. What is this? It is a charitable trust, I explained. I endowed it with the royalties from the hydraulic valve patent. It generates about $60,000 a month. The mission of the foundation is to provide legal aid and housing for victims of elder abuse and financial fraud. And you are the executive director. Harper stared at me. Samuel, I can't run a foundation. I am a soldier. You are a protector, I corrected her. You protected me. Now I want you to protect others. You have the instincts. You have the heart. And now you have the resources. The money is yours, Harper. Use it to make sure nobody else has to go through what I did. Tears welled up in her eyes. She stood up and walked around the table. She hugged me. It wasn't the desperate act of the girl in the police station. It was the embrace of a daughter hugging her father. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me, I said, patting her back. You earned it. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. 1 year later, I sat on the porch of my new home. It wasn't a mansion. It was a farmhouse on 50 acres of land 2 hours away from the city. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I had sold the Colonial. I couldn't live there anymore. Too many ghosts. Here, there was only peace. I rocked in my chair, sipping a glass of iced tea, watching the sun dip below the tree line. I was fixing up the barn in the back, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The wood was honest. It didn't lie. It didn't steal. A car crunched up the gravel driveway. It was a silver sedan, practical and safe. Harper got out. She was glowing. She walked up the steps, a smile on her face that lit up the evening. A man got out of the driver's side, Mark. He was a good man, a teacher. He treated her like gold. I liked him. Hey, Dad, Harper called out, walking up the steps. Hey, sweetheart, I said. How was the doctor? She stopped in front of me. She reached into her purse. She pulled out a small black and white photograph. She handed it to me. It was a grainy image, a blur of gray and white. But I knew what it was. I was an engineer. I knew how to read structures. I looked at the tiny heartbeat in the center of the image. It is a boy, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You are going to be a grandpa, Samuel, a real one. I traced the image with my thumb. My hand shook a little. A grandson, not by blood. Tyrell's bloodline had ended in a prison cell. This child didn't share my DNA. He wouldn't have my eyes or my nose, but he would have my name. He would have my legacy. He would be raised by a woman who knew the value of honor and courage. He would be raised to know that family isn't about who you are born to, but who you choose to stand beside when the fire comes. I looked up at Harper. Tears were streaming down my face, but they were good tears. They were tears of joy. He is beautiful, I said, my voice raspy. He is perfect. Mark walked up and put his arm around Harper. We want to name him Samuel, she said, if that is okay with you. I nodded, unable to speak. I took a sip of my tea to clear the lump in my throat. I looked out at the land, at the strong oak trees standing sentinel in the twilight. I thought about Tyrell. I thought about the betrayal. I thought about the pain. And I realized it didn't matter anymore. It was all just dust in the wind. Blood is nothing, I said softly, looking at my daughter and her future. Love is everything. The sun set, casting long shadows across the porch. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I had my family, I had my peace, and I had a barn to fix in the morning. My name is Samuel Bennett. I am 69 years old, and I am the richest man in the world. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. And remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. We are the ones who build the world, and we are the ones who can take it apart. Stay safe out there. The most painful lesson I learned wasn't about money or betrayal. It was about the true definition of family. For decades, I believed that shared DNA was a binding contract of love, but I was wrong. The title of family is earned through loyalty, respect, and action, not inherited by birth. I spent years protecting a son who saw me only as a prey, while a stranger I met in a police station became the daughter who saved my life. Do not cling to toxic people simply because they share your blood. Sometimes, the empty chair at your table brings more peace than one occupied by a traitor. If you believe that loyalty is the only currency that truly matters, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and survival.